Daniel Brooks stood at the edge of his wife's grave, a foreclosure notice crumpled in his fist and a silent daughter clutching his hand. He was 34 years old, drowning in $87,000 of debt, and exactly 3 days away from losing everything. Then he found the ad. $80,000 a year. Driver needed. No questions asked. That job nobody wanted? It would become the best decision of his life. Stay with me until the end and comment below which city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The rain fell in thick sheets across Riverside Cemetery, turning the freshly packed earth into a dark wound against the Kentucky hillside. Daniel Brooks stood motionless beneath a black umbrella that did nothing to stop the cold from seeping into his bones. His suit, the same one he'd worn to his wedding 8 years ago, hung loose on his shoulders now. He'd lost 20 pounds in the 6 months since Sarah got sick, another 10 since she stopped breathing in that hospital bed, her hand going cold in his while their daughter slept in the chair beside them. "Daddy?" The word was barely a whisper. Daniel looked down at Lily, her small face pale beneath the hood of her raincoat. She hadn't spoken much since the funeral 3 weeks ago. 7 years old, and already she understood that some losses couldn't be fixed with bandages or bedtime stories. "Yeah, baby?" But Lily didn't say anything else. She just pointed at the headstone, where rainwater pooled in the carved letters of her mother's name. Sarah Michelle Brooks, beloved wife and mother, 1986-2024. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, that might make this moment less brutal. But what words existed for a child watching her mother's grave fill with rain? What comfort could he offer when he couldn't even comfort himself? "We should go," he finally managed. "You'll catch cold." Lily nodded, but didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the headstone, and Daniel recognized the look on her face. It was the same expression he saw in the mirror every morning, the look of someone trying to understand how the world could keep spinning when their entire universe had collapsed. He knelt down beside her, his knees sinking into the wet grass. "Hey, look at me." Slowly, Lily turned. Her eyes, Sarah's eyes, that same impossible shade of green, met his. "Mommy's not really gone," Daniel said, the words catching in his chest. "She's right here." He pressed his hand against Lily's heart. "And here." He touched her temple gently. "Every time you remember her laugh, every time you think about the stories she told you, every time you see something beautiful and wish you could show her, that's her, still with us. Okay?" Lily stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his chest, right over his heart. "You too, Daddy?" Daniel's vision blurred. "Yeah, baby, me too." They stood there in the rain for another few minutes, two broken pieces of a family that used to be whole. When they finally walked back to the car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and an engine that knocked whenever it idled, Daniel carried Lily in his arms, her face pressed against his shoulder. He didn't look back at the grave. He couldn't. The apartment was dark when they got home. Daniel had stopped paying the electric bill 2 months ago, choosing instead to put that money toward the hospital bills that kept arriving like paper avalanches. The power company had been patient, a courtesy extended to grieving families, he supposed. But patience had limits. The lights had gone out 3 days ago. "Careful on the stairs," Daniel said, guiding Lily up to the second floor with a flashlight. The building was old, the stairs creaked, and the hallway smelled like mildew and other people's cooking. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. No, it was all they used to have. The foreclosure notice was still sitting on the kitchen counter where Daniel had thrown it that morning. He'd read it so many times he had the words memorized. Failure to pay. 30 days to vacate. Legal action will be taken. 30 days. That was all the time they had left. Daniel helped Lily change out of her wet clothes and into her pajamas. He microwaved a can of soup on the gas stove, the one utility he'd managed to keep running, and they ate in silence at the kitchen table, a single candle flickering between them. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was so quiet he almost missed it. "Yeah, sweetheart?" "Where are we going to live?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on getting through each day, each hour, each minute, that he hadn't let himself think about what came next. But Lily was thinking about it. Of course she was. She was 7, not stupid. I'm going to figure that out, he said, forcing confidence into his voice. I promise. Daddy's going to take care of everything. How? Daniel opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out. How? That was the question, wasn't it? He'd been a construction supervisor before Sarah got sick. A good one, too, with a steady paycheck and benefits and a 401k that was supposed to fund their retirement. But he'd taken leave to care for her, then more leave when she got worse, and by the time she died, there was no job to go back to. The company had restructured. His position had been eliminated. He'd filed for unemployment, but the payments barely covered groceries, let alone rent and medical debt and all the other bills that kept piling up like corpses after a battle. I'm going to find a job, Daniel finally said. A good one, and we're going to be okay. Lily looked at him with those green eyes, so like her mother's, and Daniel could see that she didn't believe him. She was too young to lie to, too smart to fool, but she didn't challenge him. She just nodded and went back to her soup. After dinner, Daniel tucked her into bed, the flashlight casting long shadows across the walls of her tiny bedroom. He read her a story, one of Sarah's favorites, about a princess who saved herself instead of waiting for a prince, and kissed her forehead. I love you, Daddy, Lily whispered. I love you too, baby. More than anything in the world. He left her door cracked open, the way she liked it, and walked back to the kitchen. The foreclosure notice seemed to glow in the candlelight, demanding attention. Daniel sat down at the table, put his head in his hands, and tried to think. He had skills. He could drive. He could manage people. He could work with his hands. But nobody was hiring. He'd sent out 43 applications in the past month and gotten exactly 2 callbacks, both for jobs that paid minimum wage and required him to work nights. Impossible with a 7-year-old who needed him home. His phone buzzed. Daniel pulled it out of his pocket, expecting another collection call, another automated reminder that his life was falling apart. Instead, it was a text from his sister in California. Any luck with the job search? Daniel stared at the message for a long moment. His sister had offered to let him and Lily stay with her, to start over on the West Coast. She meant well. She always meant well. But California was 3,000 miles away from everything Daniel knew, from the house where he and Sarah had built their life, from the cemetery where she now rested. Still looking, he typed back, Something will come up. Let me know if you need money. I can send some. Daniel's pride wanted to refuse. His circumstances wouldn't let him. Maybe next week, he replied. Thanks, Jenny. He put the phone down and stared at the foreclosure notice again. 30 days. Less than that now, 27. And then what? A shelter? His sister's couch? The street? Daniel walked to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked city. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives. Going to work, coming home, kissing their spouses, tucking in their kids. They didn't know how close they were to losing everything. They didn't understand that the line between stability and catastrophe was thinner than a spider's web. He'd understood once, before Sarah got sick, before the world fell apart. Now he understood too well. The next morning, Daniel dropped Lily off at school. The teachers knew about Sarah, everyone knew, and they'd been kind about the unpaid lunch fees and the permission slips he kept forgetting to sign. But kindness had limits, just like patience, and Daniel could see the concern in their eyes when they looked at Lily. She hadn't spoken to another child in weeks. She sat alone at lunch, alone at recess, alone in that terrible way that only grieving children can be alone. She's adjusting, Mrs. Patterson, her teacher, told Daniel in the hallway. It takes time. How much time? Mrs. Patterson's smile was sad. As much as she needs. Daniel thanked her and walked back to his car. He had 6 hours until he needed to pick Lily up. 6 hours to find a miracle. He started at the unemployment office, where he sat for 2 hours filling out forms and waiting for a counselor who told him nothing he didn't already know. He applied for food stamps, swallowed his pride, and sat through an interview with a caseworker who looked at him with a mixture of pity and bureaucratic exhaustion. You'll hear from us within 2 weeks, she said. I don't have 2 weeks, Daniel said. She shrugged. That's the process, Mr. Brooks. He left the office feeling worse than when he'd arrived. The rain had stopped, replaced by a gray sky that seemed to press down on the city like a wet blanket. Daniel walked to a coffee shop, the cheap kind, where a cup cost $1 and they didn't mind if you sat for hours, and pulled out his phone to search job listings. Most of what he found was what he'd already seen. Minimum wage positions, night shifts, jobs that required experience he didn't have or degrees he couldn't afford. He scrolled past restaurant gigs and warehouse work and exciting opportunities that turned out to be pyramid schemes. And then he saw it. The ad was buried in the classified section, wedged between a listing for a used refrigerator and an offer for free puppies to Good Home. It was only 3 lines long, $80,000 a year. Driver needed, no questions asked. At the bottom was a phone number and an address. Daniel stared at the ad for a long moment. $80,000 a year was more than he'd ever made in his life. It was enough to pay off his debts, find a new apartment, give Lily the stability she desperately needed. It was enough to start over. But no questions asked? What kind of job came with a condition like that? Daniel's first instinct was to scroll past. Whatever this was, it couldn't be legitimate. Probably a scam, or worse, something illegal. He wasn't desperate enough to get involved with criminals. Except, he was desperate. He was exactly that desperate. He looked at the address. It was in the old money part of town, up on the hill where the mansions looked down on the rest of the city like disapproving grandparents. Rich people lived there. Old families, the kind who'd been wealthy for so long they'd forgotten what it meant to struggle. What would someone like that need a driver for? And why would they pay so much? Daniel's thumb hovered over the phone number. His rational mind screamed at him to forget it, to keep scrolling, to find something safe and normal and boring. But his rational mind wasn't the one facing eviction in 27 days. His rational mind wasn't the one with a silent daughter and a dead wife and a stack of bills that grew higher every time he blinked. He pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. Hayes residence? The voice was male, elderly, with the crisp formality of old-school service. I'm calling about the ad, Daniel said. The driver position. A pause. I see. And your name? Daniel Brooks. Mr. Brooks, can you be here at 4 o'clock this afternoon? Daniel checked his watch. It was already 2:30, and he needed to pick up Lily at 3. I have to get my daughter from school first. Could I come at 4:30? Another pause, longer this time. You have a child? Yes, she's 7. I see. The voice on the other end seemed to be weighing something. 4:30 will be acceptable. The address is 847 Hillcrest Drive. Please use the service entrance on the east side of the property. I'll be there. Good. The line went dead. Daniel sat in the coffee shop for another moment, his heart beating faster than it should. He didn't know what he was walking into. He didn't know anything about the Hayes family or why they needed a driver or what no questions asked really meant. But he knew one thing. He had to try. Hillcrest Drive wound up the side of the hill like a lazy serpent, flanked on both sides by estates that looked more like small kingdoms than homes. Daniel drove past gates and hedges and security cameras, feeling more out of place with every turn. His Honda Civic, with its cracked windshield and faded paint, looked like a cockroach crawling through a palace. Lily sat in the back seat, coloring in a book Daniel had bought at the dollar store. She hadn't asked where they were going, and he hadn't explained. What would he even say? Daddy's applying for a mysterious job because we're about to be homeless? That wasn't a conversation he was ready to have. The GPS announced their arrival, and Daniel pulled up to a wrought iron gate that stretched at least 12 feet high. Beyond it, a long driveway curved through manicured grounds toward a mansion that looked like something out of a Gothic novel. The building was massive, 3 stories of gray stone with towers and turrets and windows that seemed to watch him like suspicious eyes. Daniel rolled down his window and pressed the intercom button. Mr. Brooks? The same voice from the phone, somehow even more formal in person. Yes. Please drive to the service entrance. It's around the east side of the house. The gate swung open silently, and Daniel drove through. He followed a narrow path around the side of the mansion, past gardens that had probably once been beautiful, but now looked overgrown and neglected. The service entrance was a plain door set into the stone, with a single light burning above it. Stay in the car, okay? Daniel told Lily. I'll be right back. She nodded without looking up from her coloring book. Daniel got out and walked to the door. Before he could knock, it opened, revealing a man in his 70s with white hair, a thin face, and eyes that seemed to have seen everything and forgiven nothing. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Rowan, the house manager. Please, come in." Daniel followed him through a narrow hallway into what appeared to be a service kitchen, industrial, functional, nothing like the grandeur he'd glimpsed from outside. Rowan led him to a small office and gestured for him to sit. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Rowan said, settling into a chair behind a modest desk. "I trust you found the address without difficulty?" "GPS did most of the work." "Indeed." Rowan studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Brooks. Your background, your experience." Daniel took a breath. "I was a construction supervisor for 12 years. Before that, I drove trucks. Long haul mostly, through the Midwest. I have a clean driving record, no accidents, no tickets in the past 10 years. I'm reliable, I'm punctual, and I don't ask questions I don't need to ask." Rowan's eyebrow rose slightly at the last part. "And your current situation?" There was no point in lying. "My wife died 6 months ago. Cancer. I left my job to take care of her, and by the time she was gone, there wasn't a job to go back to. I've got a daughter. She's 7, and we're about to lose our apartment. I need work, Mr. Rowan. I need it badly." Rowan was quiet for a moment, his eyes still fixed on Daniel's face. "And yet you called about an advertisement that most people would dismiss as suspicious, no questions asked. Doesn't that concern you?" "Everything concerns me right now," Daniel said. "But I've got a choice between concerned and homeless, and I'd rather take my chances." The faintest hint of a smile crossed Rowan's face. "Honest. I appreciate that." He leaned back in his chair. "The position is straightforward, Mr. Brooks. You would be the personal driver for Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. You would transport her wherever she wishes to go, wait for her as long as necessary, and bring her home. The hours are irregular. Sometimes she will need you daily, sometimes not for weeks at a time. But you will be on call and you will be paid whether you drive or not." $80,000 a year? "Correct. Plus the use of the vehicle, naturally. A Mercedes sedan, fully maintained. And if you require accommodations..." "What's the catch?" Rowan paused. "I'm sorry?" "The catch," Daniel repeated. "Nobody pays $80,000 a year for a driver without a catch. What aren't you telling me?" Rowan was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mrs. Hayes is not an easy person to work for. She has certain habits, certain routines that must be respected without question. She does not engage in small talk. She does not explain her actions. She does not tolerate deviation from her instructions. The previous 3 drivers lasted less than 2 months each. The 4th didn't make it through the first week." "What happened to them?" "They asked too many questions." Rowan turned to face him. "This is not a job for the curious, Mr. Brooks. This is a job for someone who can accept that they will see things they don't understand, hear things that make no sense, and be asked to do things that seem pointless or even bizarre. If you can do that, if you can simply drive, wait, and drive home again without demanding explanations, then you will find Mrs. Hayes a generous employer." Daniel thought about the foreclosure notice, about Lily's silent grief, about the empty refrigerator and the dark apartment and all the ways his life had fallen apart. "When do I start?" Rowan took him to meet Mrs. Hayes. They walked through the mansion, and Daniel couldn't help but stare. The interior was beautiful in a cold, haunted way. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, paintings that looked like they belonged in museums. But it was also silent. No music, no conversation, no laughter. The kind of silence that accumulated over years of loneliness. "Mrs. Hayes keeps to herself," Rowan said quietly, as if reading Daniel's thoughts. "She has few visitors and fewer friends. You will likely be one of the only people she sees on a regular basis." "What about family?" Rowan's expression flickered just for a moment. "There is no family, not anymore." Before Daniel could ask what that meant, they arrived at a set of double doors. Rowan knocked once, then pushed them open. The room beyond was a study, lined with books and dominated by a massive fireplace that sat cold and dark. And in a chair by the window, silhouetted against the gray afternoon light, sat Eleanor Hayes. She was older than Daniel had expected, somewhere in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back severely from a face that might once have been beautiful. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and they fixed on Daniel with an intensity that made him want to step back. "Mrs. Hayes," Rowan said, "this is Daniel Brooks, the new driver." Eleanor said nothing. She just stared at Daniel, her expression completely unreadable. The silence stretched out for 5 seconds, 10, 20. Daniel felt sweat begin to form on the back of his neck. "You're married," Eleanor finally said. Her voice was low, rough, like she hadn't used it in a while. "I was. My wife passed away." Something shifted in Eleanor's eyes. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps pain. "Children?" "A daughter, 7 years old." "Where is she now?" Daniel hesitated. "In the car. I didn't know how long this would take." Eleanor stood abruptly and walked to the window. For a moment, Daniel thought he'd said something wrong, that the interview was over before it had really begun. But then Eleanor spoke again, her voice softer now. "Bring her in." "Ma'am?" "Your daughter. Bring her inside. It's cold in that car." Daniel looked at Rowan, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'll show you back to the entrance." Lily was still coloring when Daniel opened the car door, her small hands gripping a purple crayon. "Hey, sweetheart, we're going inside for a bit, okay?" She looked up at him, her expression uncertain. "Why?" "I'm talking to someone about a job. They want to meet you." "Why?" It was the most Lily had spoken in days, and Daniel felt a small spark of hope. "I'm not sure. But they seem nice. Will you come with me?" Lily considered this for a moment, then closed her coloring book and climbed out of the car. She took Daniel's hand, and together they walked into the Hayes mansion. Rowan led them back through the hallways to the study. Eleanor was still standing by the window, but she turned when they entered. Her eyes went immediately to Lily, and something changed in her face. A softening. A crack in the stone mask she wore. "Hello?" Eleanor said, her voice gentler than it had been before. "What's your name?" Lily pressed closer to Daniel's leg. She didn't answer. "This is Lily," Daniel said. "She's a little shy." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I understand." She took a step closer, then knelt down so she was at Lily's eye level. It was a graceful movement, despite her age, and it transformed her from an intimidating figure into something almost vulnerable. "I lost someone too," Eleanor said quietly. "Someone very important to me. It's hard to talk after something like that, isn't it?" Lily stared at her. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Eleanor smiled, a small, sad smile, but a smile nonetheless. "You have your father's eyes. They're kind eyes. He must be a good father." She stood and looked at Daniel. "You're hired, Mr. Brooks. Rowan will explain the details. You start tomorrow." And just like that, the interview was over. That night, Daniel lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Lily's soft breathing in the next room. He'd signed the paperwork, received an advance on his first month's salary, and scheduled his first day for 8 o'clock the following morning. In less than 24 hours, his life had gone from hopeless to something else. He didn't know what to make of Eleanor Hayes. She was clearly wealthy, clearly troubled, clearly surrounded by secrets. The mansion felt more like a mausoleum than a home, and Rowan's warnings echoed in his mind. She has certain habits, certain routines that must be respected without question. What did that mean? What kind of routines? No questions asked. Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about Sarah, about the way she used to tease him for his curiosity. "You're like a cat," she'd say, always poking your nose where it doesn't belong. Maybe she was right. Maybe his curiosity would be his downfall, but right now it didn't matter. What mattered was the check sitting on his dresser, enough to stop the foreclosure, enough to turn the lights back on, enough to buy Lily new shoes because her old ones were wearing through at the toes. What mattered was surviving. Whatever secrets Eleanor Hayes was hiding, whatever strange routines she followed, whatever demons haunted that empty mansion, Daniel would deal with them. He would drive where she told him to drive, wait where she told him to wait, and keep his mouth shut. He had no choice. The first day came with a cold dawn and a thin layer of frost on the windshield. Daniel scraped the ice with a credit card. His actual scraper had been sacrificed to the pawn shop months ago and drove Lily to school in silence. "I've got a new job," he told her as they pulled up to the building. "I might be late picking you up sometimes, but Grandma Jenny said she'd call you after school to check in, okay?" Lily nodded. "And I love you. You know that, right?" Another nod. Daniel watched her walk into the building, her small backpack bouncing with each step. Then he turned the car toward Hillcrest Drive. The mansion looked even more imposing in the morning light, the stone darker, the windows more watchful. Daniel parked by the service entrance and found Rowan waiting for him with a set of keys. "The Mercedes is in the garage," Rowan said. "Tank is full, GPS is updated, and there's a thermos of coffee in the cup holder. Mrs. Hayes prefers you to wait in the car until she's ready." "How will I know when she's ready?" "She'll come out." Rowan handed him the keys. "And Mr. Brooks? Whatever happens today, remember what we discussed. No questions." Daniel nodded and walked to the garage. The Mercedes was a sleek black sedan, newer than any car he'd ever driven, with leather seats that probably cost more than his annual salary at his old job. He climbed in, adjusted the mirrors, and waited. 1 hour passed, then 2. Daniel drank the coffee and watched the mansion through the windshield. Nothing moved. No one appeared. He was starting to wonder if he'd misunderstood the instructions when the back door of the Mercedes suddenly opened. Eleanor Hayes slid into the back seat, dressed entirely in black. Her face was pale, her expression the same unreadable mask from the day before. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," Daniel said. She didn't respond. "Where would you like to go?" Eleanor handed him a slip of paper. On it was written an address, nothing more. Daniel entered it into the GPS and pulled out of the garage. The destination was across town, a children's hospital on the east side, the kind of place that specialized in long-term care for sick kids. Daniel had been there once, years ago, to visit a colleague's son. The memory wasn't pleasant. He pulled into the parking lot and found a spot near the entrance. Through the rearview mirror, he could see Eleanor staring at the building, her face utterly still. "Do you need me to—" "Stay in the car." She got out and walked toward the hospital, but she didn't go inside. She just stood there, on the sidewalk, staring at the entrance. She stood there for exactly 30 minutes. Daniel watched the clock, then turned and walked back to the car. She handed him another slip of paper, another address. This time it was a law office downtown, a sleek glass building with the names of partners etched in gold letters above the door. Again, Eleanor got out. Again, she stood and stared. Again, 30 minutes. Then back to the car, another slip of paper, another address. The third stop was an empty lot in a residential neighborhood, just a foundation of concrete with weeds growing through the cracks. A sign posted at the edge read, "Future site of something," but the rest had been weathered away. Eleanor stood at the edge of the foundation, looking down at the concrete like it was a grave. 30 minutes. The fourth and final stop was a bank, a large commercial building in the financial district, all marble columns and brass fixtures. Eleanor didn't go inside here either. She just stood on the sidewalk, her hands clasped in front of her, staring through the glass doors. 30 minutes. When she got back in the car, Daniel drove her home in silence. She didn't speak, she didn't look at him. She just sat in the back seat like a ghost, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. At the mansion, she got out without a word and walked inside. Daniel sat in the car for a long moment, his hands still on the wheel. 4 locations, 2 hours of standing and staring. No explanations, no conversations, no apparent purpose, no questions asked. He drove home, picked up Lily from her after-school program, made dinner, helped her with her homework. He didn't tell her about his strange day. He didn't tell her about Eleanor Hayes and her silent pilgrimages to places that seemed to hold no meaning. But that night, lying in bed, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about it. What was she looking for? What did those 4 locations have in common? Why would anyone pay $80,000 a year for a driver just to take them to stare at buildings? No questions asked. But Daniel had questions. So many questions. And something told him that sooner or later he was going to find the answers, whether he wanted to or not. The next day was the same. And the day after that. And the day after that. Every morning, Daniel drove to the Hayes mansion. Every morning, he waited in the Mercedes until Eleanor appeared. And every day, they made the same 4 stops: the children's hospital, the law office, the empty foundation, the bank. 4 locations, 30 minutes each, then home. Eleanor never spoke beyond the essentials. She never explained. She never showed emotion. She was like a machine running a program that only she understood, and Daniel was just the engine that carried her from place to place. By the end of the first week, he had the route memorized. By the end of the second, he could predict the exact moment Eleanor would return to the car from each stop. By the end of the third, he had stopped wondering about the purpose of it all and simply accepted that this was his life now. Wake up, drive Lily to school, drive Eleanor to her silent vigils, pick up Lily, make dinner, sleep, repeat. It was monotonous, but it was also stable, more stable than anything Daniel had experienced since Sarah's diagnosis. The electricity was back on, the foreclosure had been stopped. Lily had new shoes, a full refrigerator, and a father who wasn't constantly panicking about where their next meal would come from. If the price of that stability was driving a grief-stricken old woman to stare at buildings for 2 hours a day, Daniel could live with that. What he couldn't live with was the silence. Lily had always been quiet. She took after Sarah in that way, thoughtful and observant rather than loud and demanding. But the silence that followed Sarah's death was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like a weight pressing down on her small shoulders. She went to school, came home, did her homework, went to bed. She didn't play, didn't laugh, didn't cry. She just existed. Daniel tried everything he could think of. He took her to the park, to the movies, to the ice cream shop where she'd once begged for sprinkles on everything. She went along with it all, obedient and compliant, but there was no joy in it, no life. Just give her time, his sister said on the phone. Kids are resilient, she'll bounce back. But Daniel wasn't so sure. He'd seen Sarah's family after she died, the way her mother had retreated into herself, the way her brother had drowned his grief in alcohol. Grief wasn't something you bounced back from. It was something that changed you, reshaped you, left marks that never fully healed. He didn't want that for Lily. He wanted her to remember her mother with joy, not with this terrible, suffocating silence. But he didn't know how to help her. It happened on a Tuesday, 4 weeks into the job. Daniel's car had broken down, finally, completely, irreparably broken down, and the mechanic had given him the news with something like pity in his eyes. It's the transmission, man. It had cost more to fix than the car's worth, which meant Daniel had no way to get Lily to school and himself to the Hayes mansion. He thought about calling in sick, but he'd never missed a day of work in his life, and something told him Eleanor wouldn't take well to unreliability. So he did the only thing he could think of. He brought Lily with him. We're going to the big house today, he told her as they rode the bus up toward Hillcrest Drive. The one I told you about. I need you to be really quiet and really well-behaved, okay? Lily nodded. She had her coloring book in her lap, her purple crayon already in hand. Rowan met them at the service entrance, his eyebrows rising when he saw Lily. Mr. Brooks, I wasn't aware you'd be bringing a guest. My car broke down. I couldn't leave her alone. I'm sorry. I should have called, but... Rowan held up a hand. It's quite all right. Mrs. Hayes has already been informed. She's waiting in the car. Daniel's heart sank. She knows? She saw you arrive from the window. Rowan's expression was unreadable. She said to bring the child. They walked to the garage in silence, Lily's hand tight in Daniel's. The Mercedes was waiting, engine running, and when Daniel opened the back door to help Lily in, he found Eleanor already seated inside. She was staring at Lily with that same strange intensity from their first meeting, like she was trying to see through her, past her, into something beyond. Hello again, Eleanor said quietly. Lily climbed into the seat across from her. She didn't say anything, but she held up her coloring book, showing Eleanor the picture she'd been working on. It was a house. A simple house with a red door, a smoking chimney, and 3 figures standing outside. A man, a woman, and a small girl. Eleanor's breath caught. That's beautiful, she whispered. Did you draw that? Lily nodded. Who are the people? Lily pointed to each figure in turn. Daddy? Mommy? Me? Your mommy. Eleanor's voice was barely audible. She's in heaven now, isn't she? Another nod. Eleanor reached out, slowly, as if afraid Lily might break. Her fingers brushed the edge of the drawing, tracing the outline of the woman in the picture. "I had a son," Eleanor said. "He's in heaven now, too." Daniel froze. He'd wondered about Eleanor's grief, about the emptiness of the mansion and the sorrow in her eyes. But he hadn't known. He hadn't dared to ask. Lily looked at Eleanor for a long moment. Then, without a word, she tore the page from her coloring book and handed it to her. "For you," she said. It was the first time she'd spoken to anyone but Daniel in weeks. Eleanor took the drawing with trembling hands. For a moment, she just stared at it, her face crumbling in a way Daniel had never seen before. Then she pressed it to her chest, closed her eyes, and let out a sound that might have been a sob. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." They made the 4 stops that day, same as always, but something was different. At each location, Eleanor would glance back at Lily, who sat quietly coloring in her book. And at each location, the 30 minutes seemed a little shorter, the silence a little less oppressive. When they returned to the mansion, Eleanor looked at Daniel for the first time in weeks. "Bring her again tomorrow," she said. "If you can." Daniel nodded. "Yes, ma'am." That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and thought about what he'd seen. The way Eleanor had looked at the drawing, the way she'd said, "I had a son," the crack in her armor that Lily, silent, grieving Lily, had somehow managed to find. He still didn't know the story behind the 4 stops. He still didn't know what Eleanor was searching for, or what she'd lost, or why she spent her days staring at buildings like a pilgrim at a shrine. But for the first time, he felt like he might actually find out. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he was ready for the answer. The change was subtle at first, so gradual that Daniel almost missed it. After that Tuesday when Lily had given Eleanor the drawing, something shifted in the rhythm of their days. The 4 stops remained the same: the children's hospital, the law office, the empty foundation, the bank, but the silence between them grew less absolute, less impenetrable. Eleanor still didn't explain where they were going or why. She still stood for exactly 30 minutes at each location, staring at buildings and empty lots like a woman searching for ghosts. But now, in the car between stops, she would sometimes glance at Lily in the rearview mirror. And sometimes, just sometimes, the hard lines of her face would soften. Daniel bought a new car with his second paycheck. Nothing fancy, just a reliable sedan that would get Lily to school without breaking down on the highway. But he kept bringing her to the mansion anyway. At first it was practical. Childcare was expensive, and Eleanor had made it clear that Lily was welcome. But as the weeks passed, Daniel realized there was something else happening, something he hadn't expected. Lily was coming back to life. It started with small things, a question at dinner about what Eleanor's house looked like inside, a request for more purple crayons because she'd used up her favorite one, the way she started looking out the window during their drives, watching the world go by with something that resembled curiosity instead of the blank stare she'd worn since Sarah's funeral. And then, one morning in early November, Lily laughed. They were in the Mercedes, waiting for Eleanor to emerge from the mansion, and Lily was telling Daniel about a squirrel she'd seen in the garden. "It was carrying a nut this big," she said, holding her hands apart to show him. "And then it dropped it, and it rolled all the way down the hill, and the squirrel chased it, and then another squirrel came and tried to steal it, and they were fighting over it like—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes going wide. And then she laughed, a real laugh, bright and sudden, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Daniel's throat tightened. It had been so long since he'd heard that sound. Months. Since before Sarah got sick, really, back when their family was whole and the future seemed like a promise instead of a threat. "What's so funny?" he managed to ask. "The squirrels, Daddy. They were so silly." "Yeah," Daniel said, his voice thick. "Yeah, they were." The back door of the car opened and Eleanor slid into her usual seat. She looked at Lily, then at Daniel, and her brow furrowed slightly. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Daniel said. "Lily was just telling me about some squirrels." Eleanor's gaze lingered on Lily for a moment. "Squirrels? In the garden," Lily said. "They were fighting over a nut. It was really funny." Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. "I see. Perhaps we should put out more nuts for them. Give them something to fight over." It was such a small thing, Such a simple comment. But it was the first time Eleanor had engaged with Lily beyond basic acknowledgments, the first time she'd offered anything that resembled conversation. Lily's eyes lit up. Can we? Really? If your father doesn't object. Daniel shook his head. No objection from me. Then it settled. Eleanor handed him the familiar slip of paper with the day's first address. Shall we? Daniel pulled out of the garage, and in the rear-view mirror he watched Lily lean toward Eleanor with barely contained excitement. What kind of nuts do squirrels like best? She asked. I'm not entirely sure, Eleanor admitted. I suppose we'll have to find out together. It was such a small moment, such a tiny crack in the wall Eleanor had built around herself. But Daniel recognized it for what it was, a beginning. The first tentative step toward something that might, with time and patience, become trust. He just didn't know yet how much pain would have to surface before that trust could grow. The days settled into a new pattern after that. Daniel would arrive at the mansion each morning with Lily in tow, and they would wait together in the Mercedes while Eleanor prepared for her daily pilgrimage. Sometimes Lily would color in her book. Sometimes she would watch the mansion's windows, counting the ones where curtains moved or lights flickered on and off. And sometimes she would talk. About school, about her friends. She was making friends again, slowly. About the stories Daniel read her at bedtime. Eleanor always listened. She never interrupted, never dismissed, never seemed impatient with the rambling observations of a 7-year-old. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, she began to respond. You read her stories at night? Eleanor asked one morning, after Lily had spent 10 minutes describing a book about a dragon who was afraid of heights. Every night, Daniel said. It was something her mother started when she was a baby. I didn't want to let it go. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. That's good. Children need rituals, routines, things they can count on when everything else feels uncertain. Is that why you do this? The question slipped out before Daniel could stop it. He immediately tensed, waiting for Eleanor's walls to go back up. But she didn't snap at him. She didn't tell him to mind his own business. She just turned to look out the window at the children's hospital they were approaching, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Something like that, she said quietly. It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't a refusal to answer either. And for the first time, Daniel felt like he might eventually understand what drove this strange, sad woman to spend her days staring at buildings that clearly caused her pain. The first real breakthrough came on a Thursday in mid-November. Lily had woken up that morning with a fever, not high enough to warrant a doctor's visit, but high enough that Daniel knew he couldn't send her to school. He'd called Rowan to explain that he would need to take the day off, apologizing profusely for the short notice. Wait, Rowan had said, his voice thoughtful. Let me speak with Mrs. Hayes. 5 minutes later, he called back. She'd like you to come anyway. She says the child can rest in one of the guest rooms while you drive. Daniel had hesitated. Bringing Lily to the mansion was one thing when she was healthy and could sit quietly in the car. Bringing her when she was sick felt like an imposition, a violation of some unspoken boundary. But Rowan had assured him it was what Eleanor wanted, and Daniel needed the work. So he bundled Lily into the car with a blanket and her favorite stuffed rabbit, a threadbare thing named Mr. Whiskers that Sarah had given her on her 3rd birthday, and drove to the mansion. Rowan met them at the service entrance and led them inside, not to the garage but through the main halls of the mansion. Daniel carried Lily, who was drowsy from the fever medicine he'd given her, and followed the house manager through corridors he'd never seen before. The interior of the Hayes mansion was even more striking up close than it had been from a distance. The walls were lined with paintings, landscapes mostly, but also portraits of people who shared Eleanor's dark eyes and severe features. The furniture was antique, the kind that looked beautiful but uncomfortable, and the air smelled faintly of wood polish and something else, something older. History, maybe. Or grief. They stopped in front of a door on the 2nd floor. Rowan opened it to reveal a bedroom that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn, a thin layer of dust visible on the windowsill. This was the blue guest room, Rowan said quietly. Mrs. Hayes thought the child might be comfortable here. Daniel laid Lily on the bed and tucked the blanket around her. She was already half asleep, Mr. Whiskers clutched tight against her chest. I'll be back soon, he whispered. You rest, okay? Okay, Daddy. He kissed her forehead, warmer than it should be, but not dangerously so, and followed Rowan back to the garage. Eleanor was already in the car, waiting. The drive that day felt different, heavier. Eleanor kept glancing toward the mansion as they pulled away, and Daniel could tell she was thinking about Lily, about the sick child resting in her guest room, in a bed that probably hadn't held anyone in years. They made the first stop at the children's hospital. Eleanor got out, as always, and stood on the sidewalk staring at the entrance. But this time Daniel found himself watching her more closely than usual. The way her hands clasped and unclasped at her sides. The way her jaw tightened whenever someone walked in or out of the doors. The way her eyes tracked the movements of families, parents with children, children with parents, like someone watching a life she used to have. When she got back in the car, her face was paler than usual. "Mrs. Hayes?" Daniel asked carefully. "Are you all right?" "Drive," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something cracking. They went to the law office next, then the empty foundation, then the bank. The same routine, the same 30 minutes at each location. But when they returned to the mansion, Eleanor didn't immediately get out of the car. "Mr. Brooks," she said. Daniel turned in his seat to look at her. "The child, Lily. How is she doing? In general, I mean. Since her mother—" It was the first time Eleanor had asked about Lily directly, the first time she'd acknowledged out loud the grief that connected them. "She's getting better," Daniel said honestly. "Slowly. She didn't talk for weeks after Sarah died. Didn't laugh, didn't play, didn't seem interested in anything, but lately, I don't know, something's changed. She's starting to come back." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then, so quietly Daniel almost didn't hear her. "Children are stronger than we give them credit for. They can survive things that would destroy an adult." Did your son survive something?" The question hung in the air between them. Daniel knew he was pushing, knew he was risking the fragile trust they'd been building. But he couldn't help himself. The mystery of Eleanor Hayes had been eating at him for weeks, and he sensed that she was close, so close, to finally letting him in. Eleanor's hand went to her throat, touching a chain that Daniel hadn't noticed before. She pulled it out from beneath her collar, and he saw that it held a small pendant, a silver oval, tarnished with age. "My son," she said slowly, "did not survive. That's why we go to those places. That's why I stand there every day, staring at buildings that mean nothing to anyone else." She turned to look at Daniel, and for the first time he saw tears in her eyes. "They're the last places where Matthew was still alive, where I still had hope, where the story hadn't ended yet." Daniel didn't know what to say. He'd suspected something like this, had pieced together fragments from Rowan's hints and Eleanor's behavior, but hearing it confirmed was different, heavier. "I'm sorry," he finally managed. "I'm so sorry." Eleanor shook her head. "Don't be sorry, Mr. Brooks. Just understand. When I look at your daughter, I see everything I lost, everything I failed to save. And it hurts. God, it hurts. But it also reminds me that I'm still capable of feeling something, that I haven't completely turned to stone." She opened the car door and stepped out, but before she walked away, she turned back. "Thank you for bringing her today. It's been a long time since this house had a child in it. I'd forgotten how much light they carry with them." She walked into the mansion, and Daniel sat in the car for a long time, processing what he'd just learned. Matthew, her son, the hospital where he was born maybe, the law office where— what? The foundation of something that was never built. The bank holding something he never got to use. Pieces of a puzzle, slowly coming together. But Daniel still didn't have the whole picture. And something told him that when he finally did, it would change everything. Lily's fever broke that night, but Eleanor insisted she come back to the mansion the next day anyway. "I've arranged for a tutor," she told Daniel when he tried to suggest that Lily should stay home and rest. "Someone to help her catch up on any schoolwork she missed. And Rowan has stocked the kitchen with soup, the kind children like, with noodles shaped like letters." Daniel stared at her. "You didn't have to do that." "I know I didn't have to. I wanted to." Eleanor's voice was crisp, businesslike, but there was something underneath it, something that might have been hope. "Unless you object." "No, No, thank you. She'll love that. And she did. Lily spent that day in the mansion's library, a cavernous room lined floor to ceiling with books that looked older than the country itself, working with a patient young woman named Claire, who had been hired specifically to help her. When Daniel returned from driving Eleanor on her rounds, he found his daughter sitting cross-legged on an antique rug, happily explaining to Claire why the letter Q was the silliest letter in the alphabet. Because it always needs you, Lily was saying. It can't do anything by itself. That's silly. Claire laughed. That's a very good point. I never thought of it that way. Daniel watched from the doorway, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind that had kept him going after Sarah died, but something gentler, something sustainable. She's remarkable, Eleanor said from behind him. Daniel turned to find her standing in the hallway, her arms crossed, watching Lily through the doorway. So bright, so curious. She reminds me of... She stopped herself, but Daniel knew what she'd been about to say. Matthew. She reminded Eleanor of her son. Thank you, Daniel said, for all of this. The tutor, the soup, letting her stay here when she was sick. You didn't have to do any of it. Perhaps not. Eleanor's gaze stayed fixed on Lily. But I've learned that doing what we have to do and doing what we should do are rarely the same thing. I spent too many years doing only what I had to. It's time I started doing what I should. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor's transformation continued. The changes were small, a comment here, a gesture there, but they added up to something significant. She started eating meals with Daniel and Lily instead of alone in her study. She began asking Lily questions about her day, her friends, her favorite things. She even laughed once, a surprise sound that seemed to catch her off guard when Lily told a joke about a chicken and a library book. But the 4 stops continued. Every day, without fail, Eleanor made her pilgrimage to the hospital, the law office, the foundation, and the bank. And every day she stood for exactly 30 minutes at each one, her face a mask of carefully controlled pain. Daniel didn't ask about it again. He'd learned enough to understand that these visits were Eleanor's way of mourning, her way of staying connected to a son she'd lost. And he respected that, even if he didn't fully understand it. What he didn't expect was for Lily to be the one who finally broke through. It happened on a gray afternoon in early December, when the first snow of the season was threatening to fall. They were at the 3rd stop, the empty foundation in the residential neighborhood, and Lily had asked if she could get out of the car. I want to see what she's looking at, she told Daniel. Can I, please? Daniel glanced at Eleanor, who was standing at the edge of the foundation, her back to the car. I don't know if that's a good idea, sweetheart. Please, Daddy. I'll be quiet, I promise. Something in Lily's voice made Daniel hesitate. It wasn't just curiosity, it was concern. His 7-year-old daughter had noticed what Daniel had been trying to ignore, the weight of sadness that Eleanor carried, the way her shoulders hunched forward when she thought no one was watching. Okay, he said, but stay with me, and don't say anything unless she talks to you first. They got out of the car and walked slowly toward Eleanor. The ground was cold, the weeds brittle and brown, and the concrete foundation looked even more desolate up close. Daniel could see now that it was larger than he'd realized, big enough for a substantial house, maybe even a small estate. Eleanor didn't turn when they approached, but she must have heard their footsteps. It was going to be a home, she said quietly. Matthew designed it himself. He was an architect, you know, so talented. He could look at an empty lot and see the whole building, finished and beautiful, right down to the color of the shutters. Daniel stopped a few feet behind her. What happened? He died before they could break ground. Eleanor's voice was flat, emotionless, but her hands were trembling at her sides. 6 months clean, finally turning his life around, and then one night he just slipped. One bad decision, one moment of weakness, and everything, all his plans, all his dreams, all the futures he was building, ended right there in his apartment with a needle in his arm. Daniel's breath caught. He'd suspected drugs, had guessed from the hospital visits and the law office that Matthew's story wasn't a simple one, but hearing it spoken aloud so bluntly was still a shock. I'm so sorry, he said. Eleanor shook her head. Don't be. I've had 7 years to make peace with it. 7 years of standing in these places, trying to understand how someone so bright, so promising, could throw it all away. She turned to face them, and Daniel saw that her eyes were dry. The tears had been cried long ago. The answer is that he couldn't help it. Addiction isn't a choice. It's a disease. And by the time I understood that, it was too late to save him. Lily tugged on Daniel's hand. He looked down at her, ready to take her back to the car, but she was staring at Eleanor with an expression he didn't recognize. My mommy couldn't help it either, Lily said. Eleanor's mask slipped just for a second. What? She got sick, really, really sick, and she tried to get better, but she couldn't. Daddy said it wasn't her fault. The sick part of her was too strong. Lily, Daniel started. It's true, Lily insisted. She let go of Daniel's hand and walked toward Eleanor, stopping just a few feet away. My mommy was sick, and she died. Your son was sick, and he died. And it hurts really, really bad. But you know what? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. What? Mommy's still with me, right here. Lily pressed her hand to her chest, exactly the way Daniel had shown her at the cemetery. And I bet your son is still with you too, right here. She reached out and pressed her small hand against Eleanor's chest, right over her heart. For a long moment, nobody moved. Daniel watched, frozen, as Eleanor stood perfectly still, staring down at the child who had just said the thing that no therapist, no friend, no priest had ever managed to say in 7 years of trying. And then Eleanor's face crumbled. She sank to her knees in the cold, dead weeds, and she wrapped her arms around Lily, and she wept. Not quietly, not politely, but with great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Daniel moved toward them, but something made him stop. This wasn't his moment. This was Lily's. This was the connection between two grieving souls that had been building for weeks, finally breaking through. Lily didn't pull away. She just stood there, her small arms around Eleanor's neck, holding on as the older woman cried. It's okay, Lily said softly. It's okay to be sad. Daddy says crying helps the sad get out. Eleanor laughed through her tears, a broken, watery sound. Your daddy is very wise. I know. Lily pulled back slightly, looking at Eleanor with those serious green eyes. Do you feel a little better now? Eleanor wiped her face with trembling hands. I do. A little. Good. Lily nodded decisively. Can we go back to the car now? It's really cold. Despite everything, the tears, the grief, the weight of 7 years of pain, Eleanor smiled. A real smile. The first one Daniel had seen from her. Yes, she said. Let's go back to the car. That night, after Daniel had put Lily to bed, he sat in the darkness of his living room and thought about what he'd witnessed. The way Eleanor had broken down. The way Lily had known exactly what to say. The connection between them that seemed to transcend age and circumstance and all the walls people built to protect themselves from pain. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Brooks, I'd like to speak with you tomorrow, alone if possible. There are things you should know. It was signed with a single letter, R. Rowan. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed his reply. I'll be there. The next morning, Daniel dropped Lily at school instead of bringing her to the mansion. She protested. She'd grown attached to Claire, to the library, to the ritual of their days. But Daniel promised she could come back the next day. There's something I need to do today, he told her. Something important. About Mrs. Eleanor? Daniel hesitated. His daughter was more perceptive than he'd given her credit for. Yes, about Mrs. Eleanor. Okay. Lily nodded solemnly. Tell her I said hi. I will, sweetheart. Rowan was waiting for him at the service entrance, as always. But instead of leading him to the garage, the house manager took him through the main house to a small sitting room Daniel had never seen before. Please, sit, Rowan said, gesturing to a leather armchair. Can I offer you tea? Coffee? Coffee, please. Black. Rowan disappeared briefly and returned with 2 cups. He handed one to Daniel and took a seat across from him, his posture formal but his expression troubled. You've been with us for almost 2 months now, Rowan began. In that time, you've seen things that would have driven other drivers away. The silence, the strange routine, Mrs. Hayes's moods. He paused. But you stayed, and more than that, you brought your daughter. You allowed her into Mrs. Hayes's life. I didn't have much choice at first, Daniel admitted. My car broke down. Perhaps. But you kept bringing her after. Why? Daniel thought about it. Because Lily needed it. She'd been so lost since her mother died, so quiet. And there was something about Mrs. Hayes, about this place, that seemed to reach her. I don't know how to explain it. You don't need to explain it, Rowan said. I've seen it too. For 7 years, I've watched Mrs. Hayes slowly disappear into herself. She stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, stopped caring about anything except those 4 stops, that endless cycle of grief. He shook his head. I thought I would watch her die. Not quickly, but slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. And now? Now I see her smile. I see her laugh. I see her engage with your daughter in ways she hasn't engaged with anyone since Matthew died. Rowan leaned forward, his eyes intense. You've given her something, Mr. Brooks. You and your daughter, something I thought was impossible. Hope. Daniel felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. I'm just a driver, Mr. Rowan. I take her where she wants to go, that's all. No, you're much more than that, and that's why I need to tell you the truth about what's happening. Daniel's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. What do you mean? Rowan was quiet for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Do you know what Hayes Industries does, Mr. Brooks? Real estate, I think. Development. Something like that. Something like that, yes. Hayes Industries is one of the largest property development firms on the East Coast. They own shopping centers, office buildings, apartment complexes. They employ thousands of people and generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every year. Okay. Daniel didn't see where this was going. Mrs. Hayes inherited the company when her husband died 15 years ago. She never wanted to run it. She was a teacher before she married into the Hayes family, if you can believe that. But there was no one else. Matthew was still in college, struggling with demons she didn't yet fully understand. So she took over, and she was good at it, ruthless even. She had to be, to survive in that world. And now? Now the company is embarking on a new project, a major redevelopment initiative in a neighborhood on the east side of the city. They're calling it the Riverside Renewal Project. Rowan's voice tightened. What they don't mention in the press releases is that the renewal will require the eviction of over 200 families from their homes. Daniel's stomach dropped. 200 families? Low-income housing, mostly. People who can't afford lawyers, can't fight back, can't do anything except pack their bags when the notices arrive. Rowan's eyes met Daniel's. People like you, Mr. Brooks. People who are one bad month away from losing everything. Daniel set his coffee cup down. His hands were shaking slightly. Does Mrs. Hayes know about this? She signed off on it 3 years ago, before Matthew died. Back then she was a different person, harder, more focused on the bottom line. Rowan sighed. She spent the last 7 years drowning in grief, Mr. Brooks. She hasn't set foot in the company offices since the funeral. The board runs everything now, and they've been waiting for this project to go forward. The eviction notices go out next month. Why are you telling me this? Rowan stood and walked to the window, his back to Daniel. Because I believe you're the only one who might be able to stop it. Me? I'm nobody. I'm just... You're the person she trusts, you and your daughter. You've broken through to her in a way no one else has been able to. Rowan turned to face him. If anyone can convince her to look at what's happening in her own company, to see the people who will be hurt by her decisions, it's you. Daniel's mind was racing. 200 families, evictions, a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And somehow, impossibly, he was supposed to be the one to fix it? What if she doesn't listen? Then nothing changes. The evictions proceed, the families lose their homes, and Mrs. Hayes continues to drown in a guilt she doesn't even know she should feel. Rowan's voice was heavy. But I've been with this family for 40 years, Mr. Brooks. I've watched them rise and fall, succeed and fail, love and lose. And I've never seen anyone reach Eleanor the way you and your daughter have. If there's a chance, even a small one, I have to believe it's worth taking. Daniel sat in silence for a long moment. He thought about Sarah, about the months they'd spent in their small apartment, terrified of the bills piling up. He thought about Lily, about the way she'd looked when he told her they might lose their home. He thought about all the other families out there right now, sitting in their own small apartments, facing their own impossible choices. "Okay," he finally said. "I'll try." Rowan's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I know it's a lot to ask." "One condition." "Name it." "You tell me everything. About Matthew. About the 4 stops. About why Eleanor is the way she is." Daniel's voice was firm. "If I'm going to help her, I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Rowan nodded slowly. "That's fair, but not here. Not now. She'll be ready for you soon, and I don't want her to suspect that we've been talking." "When then?" "Tonight, after you drop her off. I'll be waiting in my office, and I'll tell you everything." Daniel stood and extended his hand. Rowan shook it, and there was something in the older man's grip, gratitude maybe, or desperation, that told Daniel just how much was riding on this conversation. "Thank you," Rowan said again, "for everything you've already done, and for what you're about to do." Daniel nodded and walked to the door, but before he left, he turned back. "Those families, the ones being evicted, is there a list?" "Why do you ask?" Daniel thought about the people who had helped him over the past 6 months, the neighbors who had brought meals after Sarah died, the church group that had paid for her funeral, the landlord who had given him extra time on the rent, again and again, until there was simply no more time to give. "Because I have a feeling I might know some of them," he said. And then he walked out to the garage where Eleanor was waiting in the Mercedes, ready for another day of standing and staring and mourning a son who would never come home. But today, for the first time, Daniel looked at her differently. Today he saw not just a grieving mother, but a woman with the power to destroy lives, or to save them. And he knew, with a certainty that settled into his bones like the winter cold, that he was going to do whatever it took to make sure she chose salvation. The drive that day felt different. Every stop, every silence, every 30-minute vigil carried a new weight now that Daniel understood what was at stake. He watched Eleanor stand outside the children's hospital and wondered if she knew how many children would lose their homes because of her company's decisions. He watched her stare at the empty foundation and wondered if Matthew would have approved of what was being done in his family's name. Most of all, he watched her with Lily's drawing, which she'd taken to keeping in her pocket. Sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, she would pull it out and trace the figures with her finger, the father, the mother, the daughter, as if reminding herself that families still existed, even when her own had been torn apart. That evening, after Daniel had taken Lily home and put her to bed, he drove back to the Hayes mansion. The lights were on in Rowan's office, a warm glow against the winter darkness, and the house manager was waiting for him with a bottle of something amber and 2 glasses. "Scotch," Rowan said, pouring. "Mrs. Hayes's husband used to drink it. The good stuff, from Scotland. I've been saving this bottle for a special occasion." "Is this a special occasion?" "I hope so." Rowan handed him a glass and settled into his chair. "Where would you like me to begin?" "The beginning," Daniel said. "Tell me about Matthew." Rowan took a long sip of his scotch, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy with decades of memory. Matthew Hayes was born in this house 35 years ago. He was a beautiful baby, dark eyes like his mother, his father's stubborn chin. Eleanor adored him from the moment she held him. He was everything to her. Rowan's gaze grew distant, but he was also fragile, sensitive, the kind of child who felt things too deeply, who couldn't build the walls other people used to protect themselves from the world. When did the problems start? High school. His father pushed him hard, too hard maybe, to follow in his footsteps. Take over the company, carry on the Hayes legacy. But Matthew didn't want that. He wanted to create things, not buy and sell them. He wanted to design buildings that people would love, spaces that would bring communities together. Rowan shook his head. His father didn't understand. They fought constantly, and Matthew found other ways to cope. Drugs? Not at first. At first it was just alcohol, then pills, then, by the time he was in college, heroin. Rowan's voice was flat, clinical, as if he'd told this story so many times that the emotion had been worn away. Eleanor didn't know. She was so focused on running the company after her husband's heart attack that she missed the signs. By the time she realized what was happening, Matthew was already lost. But he got clean. You said he was 6 months sober when he died. He was. She had him committed to a treatment facility. That's why we visit the law office, where she signed the papers. It was the hardest thing she ever did, and it nearly destroyed their relationship. Matthew felt betrayed, abandoned. He didn't speak to her for 2 years. Rowan finished his scotch and poured another. But eventually he got better. He came home. He started working again, designing buildings, making plans. The foundation we visit, that was going to be his masterpiece. A home for families in need, built with sustainable materials, filled with light and green spaces. He called it the Hope House. What happened? Rowan was silent for a long moment. One night, one old friend from his using days showing up with one last fix. For old time's sake, the friend said. Just one more time. His voice cracked slightly. Matthew was found the next morning. The needle was still in his arm. Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about Sarah, about the way cancer had stolen her piece by piece until there was nothing left. But at least that had been a disease he could see, a battle he could understand. Matthew's death, so sudden, so senseless, so avoidable, seemed infinitely crueler. The 4 stops, Daniel said. They're all connected to him. Yes. The hospital where he was born, the law office where Eleanor signed the commitment papers, the foundation where his dream would never be built, and the bank. Rowan paused. The bank holds a trust fund Eleanor set up for Matthew when he was a child. $2 million meant to secure his future. He never touched it. He never got the chance. So she just stands there every day, reliving it. It's her penance. Rowan's voice was soft. She blames herself, you see, for not seeing the signs, for pushing him away when he needed her most, for being so focused on building an empire that she forgot to save her own son. Daniel sat with that for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. 7 years of daily pilgrimages. 7 years of standing in the same spots, asking the same questions, never finding any answers. And the Riverside Project, he asked? How does that fit in? It doesn't. That's the tragedy. Rowan leaned forward. Eleanor approved the project 3 years ago, before she truly understood what she'd lost. She was trying to prove she could still run the company, still be the ruthless businesswoman her husband had trained her to be. But now she's different. She's seen what grief can do, how it can destroy families, how it can leave people with nothing. If she knew what Riverside would cost, not in money, but in human lives, I believe it would break her heart. So why hasn't anyone told her? Because the board doesn't want her involved. They've been running the company without her for 7 years, and they've grown comfortable with that arrangement. If Eleanor woke up, started paying attention again, started asking questions, Rowan shrugged. Let's just say it would be inconvenient for certain people. Daniel drained his scotch and set the glass down. You want me to wake her up? I want you to try. You've already started, whether you realize it or not. The way she looks at Lily, the way she started to engage with the world again, that's your doing, Mr. Brooks. Yours and your daughter's. And if I fail, Rowan met his eyes, then 200 families lose their homes, and Eleanor Hayes dies slowly, drowning in a guilt she doesn't even know the full extent of. He paused. But I don't think you'll fail. I've seen the way she trusts you. It's the first time in 7 years she's trusted anyone. Daniel stood and walked to the window. Outside, the mansion's grounds stretched away into darkness, the bare trees like skeletons against the winter sky. Somewhere out there, families were going about their evening routines, cooking dinner, helping with homework, tucking children into bed, unaware that their entire lives might be upended by decisions made in boardrooms they'd never see. I need that list, Daniel said. The family's being evicted. I need to know who they are. I'll have it for you tomorrow. And I need access to Eleanor. Real access, not just driving her around. Time to talk, to show her what's happening. That may be more difficult. She's not used to... Figure it out. Daniel turned to face Rowan, his jaw set. You asked me to do this. Now give me the tools to do it right. Rowan studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. Very well. I'll arrange something. A dinner, perhaps. Or not dinner. Something real. Something that will make her see. What did you have in mind? Daniel thought about it. About Eleanor standing at the empty foundation, staring at a dream that never came true. About Matthew's Hope House, designed to give families in need a place to call home. The foundation, he said. Matthew's foundation. Is the land still there? Yes. Eleanor owns it outright. She's never sold it. Then that's where we start. We take her there, not for 30 minutes of standing and staring, but to actually see the neighborhood, meet the people, understand what her company is about to do to them. Rowan's expression shifted from skepticism to something like hope. You think that will work? I think it's our best shot. Daniel grabbed his coat. Get me that list. And arrange for us to go to the foundation tomorrow, all day, not just a quick stop. Tell her I want to show her something about Matthew. She won't like being manipulated. I'm not manipulating her, I'm showing her the truth. What she does with it is up to her. Daniel walked to the door, but Rowan's voice stopped him. Mr. Brooks, one more thing. Yeah? Those families on the list, you said you might know some of them. Rowan's voice was careful. Were you right? Daniel thought about the names he'd glimpsed in the files Rowan had shown him, the addresses, the neighborhoods. Mrs. Patterson, he said quietly, Lily's teacher. She lives in Riverside. She's been helping us since Sarah died, checking on Lily, sending home extra worksheets, making sure she doesn't fall behind. He paused. She's on the list. Rowan closed his eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just help me fix it. And with that, Daniel walked out into the winter night, his mind already spinning with plans and possibilities, and the faint, desperate hope that somehow, against all odds, he might be able to save them all. The next morning dawned cold and gray, with thick clouds hanging low over the city and a bitter wind that cut through every layer of clothing. Daniel dropped Lily at school with a kiss and a promise that he'd tell her all about his day when he picked her up, then drove to the Hayes mansion with a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Rowan met him at the door with a folder tucked under his arm. The list, he said, handing it over. 217 families, names, addresses, current employment status, number of children. Everything the board compiled when they were assessing the impact of the project. Daniel flipped through the pages, his heart sinking with every name. So many families, so many children, and yes, there, on page 15, Mrs. Janet Patterson, elementary school teacher, single occupant, Riverside Apartments Unit 4B. Did you arrange the visit? He asked. I did. Mrs. Hayes wasn't pleased, but she agreed. Rowan's expression was guarded. She thinks you want to show her something about Matthew. I didn't tell her the real reason. Good. Let's keep it that way until we get there. Eleanor was waiting in the Mercedes when Daniel climbed behind the wheel. She looked different today, more alert, more present, as if the prospect of learning something new about her son had awakened something inside her. Mr. Brooks, she said, Rowan tells me you have something to show me. I do. Is it about Matthew? Daniel considered his answer carefully. In a way, it's about what Matthew believed in, what he wanted to build. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. Very well, let's go. They drove to the Riverside neighborhood, the same route they'd taken 100 times before. But instead of stopping at the empty foundation, Daniel drove past it, into the heart of the community. It wasn't a wealthy area, far from it. The buildings were old, many of them in need of repair, with peeling paint and cracked sidewalks and windows patched with tape. But there were also signs of life everywhere. Children playing in the streets, neighbors chatting on stoops, small businesses with hand-painted signs offering everything from haircuts to home-cooked meals. Where are we going? Eleanor asked, a note of confusion in her voice. Right here. Daniel pulled the car to a stop in front of a community center, a modest building with a basketball court on one side and a playground on the other. I want you to meet some people. Eleanor's confusion deepened. What people? The people who live here. The people your company is about to evict. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and unavoidable. Daniel watched Eleanor's face go through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, denial, before settling into a carefully neutral mask. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Yes, you do." Daniel pulled out the folder Rowan had given him. The Riverside Renewal Project. "You signed off on it 3 years ago. 217 families, Mrs. Hayes. That's how many people are going to lose their homes so your company can build luxury condominiums." Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she took the folder. She opened it, flipped through the pages, and Daniel watched as the color drained from her face. "I didn't—" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't know it was like this. The board said it was just old warehouses, abandoned buildings. Look at the names." Daniel's voice was firm but not unkind. "These aren't warehouses. These are people, families, children." Eleanor's eyes moved down the list, pausing here and there as names caught her attention. And then she stopped, her finger hovering over an entry near the bottom of the page. "Marcus Washington," she read aloud. "Riverside Community Center, Youth Program Coordinator." "That's the building we're parked in front of," Daniel said. "Marcus has been running youth programs here for 15 years. Basketball leagues, tutoring, summer camps. Half the kids in this neighborhood would be on the streets if it weren't for him." Eleanor looked up at the community center, at the children shooting hoops on the court, at the teenagers gathered around a picnic table doing homework together. "And he's going to lose all of this? Unless someone stops it." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, she opened the car door and stepped out. "Mrs. Hayes?" Daniel scrambled to follow her. "Where are you going?" "To meet Marcus Washington," she said, her voice stronger than he'd heard it in weeks. "And to find out exactly what my company has done." Daniel watched her walk toward the community center, her back straight and her head high. And despite everything, the uncertainty, the fear, the impossible odds, he felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this was going to work. Maybe Eleanor Hayes was finally ready to wake up. The community center smelled like floor wax and basketballs, with an undertone of the cafeteria lunch that had been served hours ago. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her black coat a stark contrast against the cheerful murals painted on the walls, rainbows and sunflowers, and children holding hands around a globe. She looked utterly out of place, this silver-haired woman from the mansion on the hill, surrounded by the vibrant chaos of a neighborhood that had learned to survive on hope and determination. Daniel watched her take it all in, the way her eyes moved from the basketball court, where teenagers were running drills under the supervision of a volunteer coach, to the homework tables, where younger children bent over worksheets with pencils clutched in small fists, the way her posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, from defensive to something else, something more vulnerable. "Mrs. Hayes?" A man emerged from an office at the back of the building. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested decades of hard work and harder choices. His smile was warm, but cautious, the smile of someone who had learned not to trust easily. "I'm Marcus Washington," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to the Riverside Community Center." Eleanor took his hand, and Daniel noticed that her grip was firmer than usual, as if she was steeling herself for something difficult. "Mr. Washington, I'm Eleanor Hayes." Marcus's smile flickered just for a moment. "I know who you are." "Then you know why I'm here." "I know what your company is planning, if that's what you mean." Marcus's voice was steady, without accusation, but there was an edge underneath it. "The eviction notices haven't gone out yet, but word travels fast in a neighborhood like this. People are scared, Mrs. Hayes. They don't know where they're going to go." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Then she looked around the community center again, at the children and the volunteers and the hand-painted murals on the walls. "Show me," she said quietly. "Show me what they're afraid of losing." Marcus studied her face, searching for something. Sincerity, maybe, or the hint of a trap. Whatever he found must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "All right. Come with me." He led them through the building, past the basketball court and the homework tables, past a small kitchen where volunteers were preparing dinner for families who couldn't afford to feed themselves, past a room where a woman was teaching English to a group of immigrants who had fled violence in their home countries. "This building has been here for 40 years, Marcus said as they walked. "My grandmother helped build it, back when this neighborhood was even poorer than it is now." She believed that every community needs a heart, a place where people can come together, support each other, find hope when everything else feels hopeless. He stopped in front of a wall covered with photographs. "These are some of the kids who've come through our programs. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers, kids who might have ended up on the streets if they hadn't had a place like this to come to." Eleanor stepped closer to the wall, her eyes moving from photo to photo. Daniel watched her face, trying to read her expression, but she had rebuilt her mask. Whatever she was feeling, she wasn't showing it. "How many families use this center?" she asked. "On any given week? About 300. But the impact goes further than that. We partner with the schools, the churches, the local businesses. We're the glue that holds this neighborhood together." Marcus's voice tightened. "If we lose this building, if all these families get evicted, that glue disappears, and everything falls apart. Where would they go?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Marcus crossed his arms. "Some of them have family they can stay with, at least temporarily. Some of them will find other apartments, maybe in neighborhoods even worse than this one. And some of them," he shook his head, "some of them will end up on the streets. That's the truth, Mrs. Hayes. That's what your luxury condominiums will cost." Eleanor turned to face him. "You said you know who I am. Do you know what I've been doing for the past 7 years? I know your son died. I know you've been grieving. And I know that while you've been locked away in that mansion of yours, your company has been making plans that will destroy lives." Marcus's voice was firm, but not cruel. "I don't blame you for that. Grief makes people blind. But you're here now. You're seeing it with your own eyes. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" It was the same question Daniel had been wrestling with since his conversation with Rowan. What was Eleanor going to do? What could she do? She was the owner of Hayes Industries, yes, but she'd been absent for 7 years. The board had been running things without her, making decisions in her name, building an empire on foundations she'd never examined. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She walked back to the wall of photographs and stood there, staring at the faces of children who had grown up to become something more than their circumstances had promised. "My son wanted to build a house," she said finally. Her voice was so quiet that Daniel had to strain to hear it. "Not just any house, a home for families in need. He called it the Hope House. He spent years designing it. Sustainable materials, green spaces, room for community gardens and playgrounds, and everything he believed a family should have." She paused. "He died before he could break ground. And I've been standing at that empty foundation ever since, wondering what might have been." Marcus moved to stand beside her. "I didn't know that." "No one does. I don't talk about Matthew. I don't talk about anything anymore." Eleanor turned to look at him, and Daniel saw something in her eyes that he'd never seen before. Not just grief, but determination. "But maybe it's time I started." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the folder Daniel had given her. She opened it to the list of families, 217 names, 217 lives hanging in the balance, and held it out to Marcus. "These are the people my company is planning to evict. I need you to tell me about them. Not the statistics, not the numbers, the people. Who are they? What are their stories? What will happen to them if they lose their homes?" Marcus took the folder and flipped through it, his expression growing heavier with each page. "You want to know about them? Fine. Let's start with Maria Gonzalez, page 3. Single mother, 3 kids, works 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Her youngest has asthma, and the only clinic that takes her insurance is 2 blocks from here. If she gets evicted, she'll have to move across town, which means an hour commute to her jobs, which means she'll have to quit one of them, which means she won't be able to afford rent anyway. It's a death spiral, Mrs. Hayes. That's what eviction looks like for people like Maria." Eleanor's face was pale, but she didn't look away. "Who else?" "James and Dorothy Williams, page 7. They've lived in this neighborhood for 50 years. James worked at the steel mill until it closed, then drove a cab until his knees gave out. Now they're on a fixed income, barely scraping by. Their apartment isn't much, but it's home. It's where they raised their children, where they buried their dog, where they've watched the seasons change through the same window for half a century. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. James told me last week that if they get evicted, he's not going to move. He's going to die in that apartment one way or another, and Dorothy will be right there beside him. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He thought about his own situation, about the foreclosure notice that had nearly destroyed his family. He'd gotten lucky. He'd found Eleanor, found this job, found a way to survive. But so many people didn't get lucky. So many people fell through the cracks. There's more, Marcus continued. Page 15, Janet Patterson. Daniel's head snapped up. Mrs. Patterson? Marcus looked at him. You know her? She's my daughter's teacher. She's been helping us since my wife died. I didn't know she was on the list until yesterday. She's been in this neighborhood for 20 years, taught half the kids who grew up here, including my own daughter. Marcus turned to Eleanor. Janet Patterson is the reason my little girl became a nurse instead of dropping out of school. She stayed late with her, helped her with her applications, wrote letters of recommendation. That's the kind of person you're evicting, Mrs. Hayes. Not statistics, not numbers. People who make this community what it is. Eleanor closed her eyes. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The sounds of the community center filled the silence. The squeak of sneakers on the basketball court, the murmur of children doing homework, the clatter of pots in the kitchen. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet with tears. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear to you, Mr. Washington, I didn't know. I believe you. Marcus's voice softened. But ignorance isn't an excuse, not when you have the power to change things. Do I have that power? Eleanor looked at Daniel, then back at Marcus. I've been gone for 7 years. The board runs everything now. They've built relationships, made deals, created entire departments I've never even heard of. If I walk in there and try to stop this project, they'll fight you, Daniel said. But you're still the majority shareholder. You still own the company. They can fight all they want, but at the end of the day, the decision is yours. It's not that simple. The legal implications, the financial obligations. Tell me something, Mrs. Hayes. Marcus stepped closer to her, his eyes intense. Your son, Matthew, the house he wanted to build. What was it for? Eleanor swallowed hard. Families. Families who needed a place to call home. And what do you think he would say if he could see what his family's company is about to do? Throwing families out of their homes so rich people can have nicer condominiums? The question hung in the air like a blade. Daniel watched Eleanor's face crumble, watched 7 years of carefully constructed walls come tumbling down. He would be ashamed, she said, her voice breaking. He would be absolutely ashamed. Then don't let it happen. Marcus put his hand on her shoulder. Don't let his legacy be this. Don't let your legacy be this. You have the power to stop it. The only question is whether you have the courage. Eleanor stood there for a long moment, tears streaming down her face, her whole body trembling. Daniel wanted to go to her, to offer some kind of comfort, but he knew this was a battle she had to fight alone. This was her moment of truth, the moment when she decided what kind of person she was going to be. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and wiped her eyes. Take me to them, she said. Marcus blinked. What? The families on that list. Maria Gonzalez, James and Dorothy Williams, Janet Patterson, all of them. I want to meet them. I want to hear their stories. I want to understand exactly what I'm about to save. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Now that, he said, is the first thing you've said that I actually believe. They spent the rest of the day walking through the Riverside neighborhood, door to door, family to family. Eleanor listened to stories of struggle and hope, of dreams deferred and children raised against impossible odds. She sat in cramped kitchens and crowded living rooms, drinking bad coffee and eating homemade cookies, letting the humanity of these people wash over her like a tide. Maria Gonzalez showed her the inhaler her youngest son needed, the one that cost $200 a month even with insurance. James and Dorothy Williams showed her the window where they'd watched their grandchildren play, the same window where Dorothy's mother had watched her own children a generation before. A young couple named David and Rachel Chen showed her the nursery they'd just finished painting, the crib waiting for a baby who would arrive in 3 months and might have no home to come to. And Janet Patterson, Lily's teacher, the woman who had helped Daniel's family survive the darkest months of their lives, sat Eleanor down at her kitchen table and told her about the children she'd taught over 20 years, the ones who had succeeded and the ones who had struggled, the ones who had made it out and the ones who had been pulled back down by circumstances beyond their control. "Every child deserves a chance," Janet said, her voice gentle but firm. "Every family deserves a home. That's what I believe, Mrs. Hayes. That's what I've dedicated my life to. And I won't lie to you, when I got that notice, when I realized I might lose everything I've built here, I thought about giving up. I thought about walking away from teaching, from this neighborhood, from all of it." She leaned forward, her eyes meeting Eleanor's. "But then I thought about my students, about Lily Brooks, who just lost her mother and needs stability more than anything, about the Martinez twins, who don't have anyone else to believe in them, about all the children who count on me to be there, day after day, no matter what." "So what did you do?" Eleanor asked. Janet smiled, a tired smile, but a real one. "I kept going, because that's what you do when people depend on you. You keep going, even when it's hard, even when it hurts." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took Janet's hand. "I'm going to stop this," she said. "I don't know how yet, but I promise you, I'm going to stop it." Janet's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. Thank you." It was dark by the time they returned to the community center. Marcus was waiting for them with 2 cups of coffee and a folder full of documents. "I pulled together everything I could find about the Riverside Renewal Project," he said, handing the folder to Eleanor. "Contracts, permits, financial projections. Most of it's public record, but some of it I had to dig for. I think you'll find it illuminating." Eleanor opened the folder and began to read. Her face went from pale to ashen as she turned the pages. "They've been planning this for 3 years," she murmured. "They bought up all the surrounding properties, negotiated tax breaks with the city, secured financing from 3 different banks. This isn't just a development project. It's a coordinated campaign to transform this entire neighborhood. And make a fortune doing it," Marcus added. "Those luxury condominiums, they're projected to sell for $500,000 each. That's a billion-dollar payday for Hayes Industries. At the cost of 217 families." Eleanor closed the folder with a sharp snap. "At the cost of everything Matthew believed in." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need to go," she said. "I need to speak with my board of directors, tonight, if possible." Daniel stepped forward. "Mrs. Hayes, not now, Mr. Brooks, please. I need to think." She was already moving toward the door, her steps quick and purposeful. "Take me home. I have phone calls to make." The drive back to the mansion was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of grief, but something sharper, more focused. Eleanor sat in the back seat with her eyes closed, and Daniel could practically see the wheels turning in her head. When they arrived at the mansion, she got out of the car without a word. But before she walked inside, she turned back. "Mr. Brooks, Daniel." It was the first time she'd used his first name. "Thank you, for today, for showing me what I needed to see." What are you going to do?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "What I should have done 7 years ago. I'm going to take back my company." She disappeared into the mansion, and Daniel sat in the car for a long time, staring at the closed door. He didn't know what was going to happen next. He didn't know if Eleanor would succeed, or if the board would find a way to stop her, or if the Riverside families would lose their homes despite everything. But for the first time in months, he felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor disappeared into her study for hours at a time, emerging only to make demands of Rowan: documents, phone numbers, contact information for lawyers and accountants and journalists who owed her favors. The mansion, which had been so quiet for so long, suddenly buzzed with energy. Daniel continued his daily routine, driving Lily to school, bringing her to the mansion in the afternoons, making the 4 stops with Eleanor. But everything felt different now. The stops were shorter, more perfunctory, as if Eleanor was finally ready to let go of the past and focus on the future. And Lily, sensitive as always to the moods of the adults around her, seemed to pick up on the change. "Mrs. Eleanor is different," she told Daniel one evening as they drove home from the mansion. "Different how?" "She's not as sad anymore. She smiles more. And she talks to me about stuff." "What kind of stuff?" Lily thought about it. "About her son, Matthew. She showed me a picture of him. He was really handsome." Daniel's throat tightened. "Did she tell you anything else about him?" "She said he liked to draw like me. She said he used to design buildings, big ones, for people to live in. And she said," Lily paused, her brow furrowing, "she said he would have liked me, that he would have been happy I was there, in his house." "That's a nice thing to say." "Yeah." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Daddy? Is Mrs. Eleanor going to be okay?" Daniel looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Her green eyes, Sarah's eyes, were serious and searching, looking for reassurance that he wasn't sure he could give. "I think so," he said finally. "I think she's trying really hard to be okay, and sometimes that's the best we can do." Lily nodded slowly. "That's what you said about Mommy, that she was trying really hard." "That's right. And it's what you say about me sometimes, when I'm sad." Daniel's heart ached. "You're doing great, sweetheart. You know that, right?" "I know." Lily smiled, a small smile, but a real one. "I'm trying really hard, too." The call came on a Thursday evening, just as Daniel was putting Lily to bed. "Mr. Brooks?" Rowan's voice was tight with urgency. "I need you to come to the mansion, now." "What's wrong?" "Mrs. Hayes she's not well. Something's happened." Daniel felt his blood run cold. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He called his neighbor, a kind older woman who had helped with Lily before, and explained that he had an emergency. Then he drove to the mansion as fast as the law would allow, his mind racing with terrible possibilities. When he arrived, Rowan was waiting at the door, his face pale and drawn. "What happened?" Daniel demanded. "The board. They held an emergency meeting this afternoon. Without her." Rowan's voice was bitter. "They've been planning a coup, Mr. Brooks. They want to remove her as chairman and take full control of the company." "Can they do that?" "Not without a shareholder vote. But they've been buying up shares, making deals with minority investors, building a coalition against her. They're going to call for a vote next week." Rowan shook his head. "She found out an hour ago. She's been in her study ever since, and I've never seen her like this." Daniel pushed past him and made his way to Eleanor's study. The door was closed, but he could hear something on the other side. Not crying exactly, but something worse. The sound of someone breaking. He knocked. "Mrs. Hayes? Eleanor? It's Daniel." No response. "Eleanor, I'm coming in." He opened the door and found her sitting on the floor beside the fireplace, surrounded by papers and photographs and documents that had been swept off her desk in what looked like a fit of rage. Her hair had come loose from its usual severe style, falling around her face in silver strands. Her hands were trembling, clutching a photograph that Daniel recognized. Matthew, young and smiling, standing in front of a building that looked like it might be a university. "They're going to take it all," she whispered. "Everything. The company, the power to stop the evictions, everything, and there's nothing I can do." Daniel crossed the room and knelt beside her. "Tell me what happened." Eleanor's voice was hollow, empty. "The board. They've been planning this for years, apparently. They let me grieve, let me disappear into my routine, let me think I was still in control. But all that time, they were building their own power base, buying shares, making alliances, waiting for the right moment to strike. How much support do they have? Enough, maybe. They claim they have 45% of the shareholders committed to voting for my removal. They only need 51 to win. Then we find the other 6%. We fight back." Eleanor laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "With what? I haven't spoken to most of these shareholders in 7 years. I don't know who they are, what they want, how to reach them. The board has been cultivating these relationships while I've been standing in parking lots, staring at buildings. She shook her head. I've been such a fool. No. Daniel's voice was firm. You've been grieving. There's a difference. Is there? Tell that to the 200 families who are about to lose their homes because I couldn't be bothered to pay attention. The evictions haven't happened yet. The vote hasn't happened yet. There's still time. Eleanor looked at him, her dark eyes swimming with tears. Time for what? Time to fight. Time to show those shareholders who you really are. Time to remind them why they invested in Hayes Industries in the first place. They invested because they wanted to make money. That's the only thing shareholders care about. Then show them that stopping the evictions is good business. Show them that there's another way. A way that doesn't destroy families, that doesn't turn the company into a villain. Show them what Matthew believed in. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. You really think that would work? I don't know. But I know that giving up definitely won't work. Daniel reached out and took her hand. You told me once that Lily carries light with her. Well, so do you, Eleanor. You've just forgotten how to let it out. A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek. My son used to say something like that. He used to tell me I was hiding my light under a bushel. Smart kid. The smartest? Eleanor's grip on his hand tightened. He would have liked you, Daniel. He would have liked what you're trying to do for those families. Then help me finish what he started. Help me build the Hope House. Not just one house, but a whole community. Show the shareholders that Hayes Industries can be about more than just profit. Show them that you can make money and do good at the same time. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly she began to gather the papers scattered around her, sorting them into piles with hands that had stopped trembling. The vote is in 6 days, she said. That's not much time to change 45% of the shareholders' minds. Then we better get started. For the next 5 days, the Hayes mansion became a war room. Daniel and Eleanor worked around the clock, making calls, sending emails, arranging meetings with shareholders who hadn't heard from Eleanor Hayes in years. Rowan pulled together every piece of information they might need: financial projections, community impact studies, architectural plans that Matthew had drawn up before he died. Lily, for her part, became the unofficial mascot of the operation. She sat in the corner of Eleanor's study, coloring and drawing and occasionally offering observations that cut straight to the heart of whatever problem they were wrestling with. Why don't you just show them the people? She asked one afternoon, when Eleanor was struggling to articulate why the Riverside project was wrong. What do you mean, sweetheart? The people you met, Maria and Mr. James and Mrs. Patterson. If the shareholder people could see them, maybe they'd understand. Eleanor looked at Daniel, and he saw something spark in her eyes. Out of the mouths of babes, she murmured. The next morning, they arranged a video call with the 3 largest minority shareholders, men and women who had invested in Hayes Industries decades ago, back when Eleanor's husband was still alive. Eleanor had prepared a presentation full of charts and graphs and financial projections, but instead of starting with numbers, she started with faces. This is Maria Gonzalez, she said, holding up a photograph that Daniel had taken during their tour of the Riverside neighborhood. She's a single mother with 3 children. She works 2 jobs, and her youngest son has asthma. If we proceed with the Riverside Renewal Project, she'll be evicted from her home, which means she'll lose access to the only clinic that takes her insurance, which means her son might die from an asthma attack that could have been prevented. She held up another photograph. This is James Williams. He's 82 years old. He's lived in his apartment for 50 years. He told me that if we evict him, he's going to die in that apartment rather than leave, and I believe him. Photograph after photograph, story after story. The shareholders listened in silence, their faces unreadable on the video screen. When Eleanor finished, there was a long pause. Mrs. Hayes, one of them finally said, a silver-haired man named Richardson who had been one of her husband's earliest partners. I have to be honest with you, the board's proposal is compelling. The Riverside project would generate significant returns for all of us. I understand that. But what you've shown us today, Richardson shook his head. That's not the company I invested in. That's not the company your husband built. And it's not the company I want to be associated with. Another shareholder, a woman named Chen, leaned forward. The question is whether we can afford to do the right thing. What's your alternative, Mrs. Hayes? If we don't proceed with Riverside, what do we do instead? Eleanor smiled, a real smile, the first one Daniel had seen from her in days. I'm glad you asked. She pulled out Matthew's designs, the Hope House plans that had been gathering dust for 7 years, and began to walk them through an alternative vision. Affordable housing instead of luxury condominiums, community spaces instead of private amenities, a development that would lift up the Riverside neighborhood instead of destroying it. It won't generate the same returns, Eleanor admitted, but it will generate returns, sustainable ones, built on a foundation of goodwill and community support. And it will do something that money can't buy. It will make Hayes Industries a company that people are proud to be associated with. The shareholders conferred among themselves. Daniel watched Eleanor's face, trying to read her expression, but she had rebuilt her mask. Whatever she was feeling, she wasn't showing it. Finally, Richardson spoke again. Mrs. Hayes, I'll be honest with you. Before today, I was planning to vote with the board. They made a compelling case, and frankly, I didn't think you were capable of running this company anymore. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. But you've shown me something today that I didn't expect. You've shown me that the woman I remember, the woman who stood beside her husband through every crisis, who built this company into what it is today, is still in there somewhere. Richardson paused. I'm not ready to commit to anything yet, but I'm willing to listen, and I'm willing to give you a chance to make your case to the full board. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. Thank you, Eleanor said. That's all I ask. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday in the Hayes Industries headquarters downtown. Daniel drove Eleanor there in the Mercedes, Lily sitting in the back seat beside her. Are you sure you want her there? Daniel had asked earlier that morning. It could get ugly. Eleanor had smiled and taken Lily's hand. That's exactly why I want her there. She reminds me what I'm fighting for. The headquarters was a towering glass building in the heart of the financial district, all sharp angles and gleaming surfaces. Daniel pulled up to the entrance and helped Eleanor and Lily out of the car. Good luck, he said. Eleanor looked at him with those dark, intense eyes. Luck has nothing to do with it. Either they see reason or they don't. Either way, I'm done hiding. She squared her shoulders, took Lily's hand, and walked into the building. Daniel watched them disappear through the revolving doors. Then he got back in the car and waited. The minutes ticked by. 1 hour. 2 hours. 3. Daniel checked his phone obsessively, waiting for news, but there was nothing. No text from Eleanor, no calls from Rowan, no indication of what was happening inside that glass tower. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Eleanor, just 2 words. Come up. Daniel parked the car and made his way to the elevator. The lobby was all marble and chrome, staffed by security guards who looked at him with barely concealed suspicion. But when he gave his name, they waved him through. The boardroom was on the top floor, a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Daniel stepped inside and immediately felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on him. The board members sat around a long mahogany table, their faces a mixture of anger, frustration, and grudging respect. Eleanor stood at the head of the table, her back straight and her chin high. And beside her, sitting in a chair that was far too big for her small frame, was Lily. She was coloring in her book, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the room. Ah, Mr. Brooks, Eleanor said. Thank you for joining us. I was just explaining to the board why we're going to be pursuing a different direction for the Riverside project. A direction that will cost us hundreds of millions of dollars, one of the board members snapped. A red-faced man in his 60s whose name tag read Harrison. A direction that will turn this company into a charity instead of a business. A direction that will make us a company worth being proud of, Eleanor replied calmly, which, in the long run, is worth more than any short-term profit. Harrison slammed his hand on the table. This is insanity. You've been gone for 7 years, and now you waltz back in here and expect us to throw away everything we've built? What you've built is a reputation for destroying communities and displacing families. That's not a legacy I want for this company, and I don't think the shareholders want it either. The shareholders want returns. That's all they've ever wanted. Then perhaps you've been talking to the wrong shareholders. Eleanor smiled, a cold, dangerous smile that Daniel had never seen before. I spent the last week speaking with our minority investors, the ones you've been ignoring while you focused on your little coup, and I have their proxies right here. She pulled a stack of papers from her briefcase and placed them on the table. 62% of the voting shares, more than enough to block your removal vote and to approve my alternative proposal. The room went silent. Harrison's face went from red to purple. You can't do this. I just did. Eleanor gathered her papers and stood. The vote will be formalized this afternoon. In the meantime, I suggest you start thinking about how you want to be remembered, Mr. Harrison, as the man who helped build something worthwhile, or as the man who tried to tear it down. She took Lily's hand and walked toward the door. As she passed Daniel, she paused. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. You did the work. You showed me why it mattered. She squeezed his hand briefly, then continued out of the boardroom, Lily skipping along beside her. Daniel lingered for a moment, looking at the shell-shocked faces of the board members. Harrison was staring at the stack of proxy votes like it was a bomb about to explode. The others were exchanging glances, already calculating how to position themselves in this new reality. It was over. They'd won. And somewhere in the Riverside neighborhood, 217 families would get to keep their homes. The days that followed the boardroom victory were unlike anything Daniel had experienced in the Hayes mansion. The silence that had once filled every corridor like a heavy fog began to lift, replaced by something warmer, something alive. Eleanor moved through the house with a new energy, her footsteps quicker, her voice stronger, her eyes bright with purpose instead of clouded by grief. But the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The board voted to proceed with my alternative proposal, Eleanor explained to Daniel the morning after the meeting, as they sat in her study reviewing the mountain of paperwork that still needed to be addressed. But approving a plan and implementing it are two very different things. Harrison and his allies are going to fight me every step of the way. They'll delay, obstruct, file legal challenges, anything to make this as difficult as possible. Can they stop you? No, but they can slow me down. And every day they slow me down is another day those families have to live in uncertainty. Eleanor's jaw tightened. I won't let that happen. Not again. She threw herself into the work with a ferocity that surprised everyone, including Rowan, who had known her for decades. She was in the office by 7 every morning and rarely left before midnight. She met with lawyers, architects, city planners, community organizers. She reviewed every contract, every permit, every line of the budget for the new Riverside Community Development Project, the name she had chosen to replace the Riverside Renewal Project, a small but significant change that signaled a completely different approach. And through it all, Lily was there. The little girl had become Eleanor's shadow, following her from meeting to meeting, sitting quietly in corners with her coloring books, while adults argued about zoning regulations and financing structures. At first, some of the executives had objected to having a child in professional settings, but Eleanor had silenced them with a single look. This child, she said, is the reason any of this is happening. She reminded me what it means to be human. And if any of you have a problem with her presence, you're welcome to find employment elsewhere. No one objected after that. Daniel watched the relationship between Eleanor and Lily deepen with each passing day. They had developed their own rituals, their own private language of gestures and glances. Eleanor would reach for Lily's hand during tense moments in meetings, drawing strength from her small fingers. Lily would leave drawings on Eleanor's desk, houses and families and gardens full of flowers, that Eleanor would study with the same intensity she brought to financial reports. She's healing her, Daniel said to Rowan one evening, as they stood in the hallway watching Eleanor read Lily a bedtime story in the library. Both of them are healing each other. Rowan nodded slowly. I've been with this family for 40 years, Mr. Brooks. I've seen births and deaths, triumphs and tragedies, but I've never seen anything quite like this. He paused. Your daughter has a gift, a rare ability to reach people who have closed themselves off from the world. She gets it from her mother. Perhaps. But she also gets it from you. Rowan turned to look at him. You could have taken the job and kept your distance. You could have driven Mrs. Hayes on her rounds and never asked any questions, never pushed any boundaries. But you didn't. You saw a woman in pain and you chose to help her. That took courage. Daniel shrugged uncomfortably. I just did what anyone would do. No, Mr. Brooks. You did what very few people would do, and this family, this strange, broken, rebuilding family, is better for it. The weeks turned into months, and the Riverside Community Development Project began to take shape. The eviction notices were formally rescinded, replaced by letters explaining the new plan. Eleanor personally signed each one, adding handwritten notes of apology and hope. The community center became the hub of operations. Marcus Washington was appointed as the community liaison, working directly with Eleanor to ensure that the voices of Riverside residents were heard at every stage of the process. Maria Gonzalez was hired to coordinate childcare services for families during the transition. James and Dorothy Williams were asked to serve on an advisory council, their decades of experience in the neighborhood proving invaluable. And Janet Patterson, Lily's teacher, the woman who had helped Daniel's family survive their darkest days, was given a grant to establish an after-school program that would serve children throughout the development. I don't know how to thank you, Janet told Eleanor during a meeting at the community center. When I got that first notice, I thought my life was over. And now you're building something that will last, Eleanor finished for her. That's thanks enough. But the most significant change was happening on the lot where Matthew's Hope House had never been built. Eleanor had decided to break ground on her son's original design, not as a single home for one family, but as a community center that would serve the entire neighborhood. The building would include affordable housing units, a health clinic, a job training center, and a memorial garden dedicated to Matthew's memory. He wanted to create spaces where families could thrive, Eleanor said, standing at the edge of the construction site on the day the foundation was poured. Daniel and Lily stood beside her, watching the concrete trucks rumble across the muddy ground. I spent 7 years mourning what could have been. Now I'm going to make it happen. Lily tugged on Eleanor's sleeve. Can I put something in the concrete, like a time capsule? Eleanor looked down at her, a smile spreading across her face. What would you like to put in? Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. When she opened it, Daniel saw that it was a drawing. A house with a red door, a smoking chimney, and 5 figures standing outside instead of the original 3. It's our family, Lily explained, pointing to each figure in turn. There's Daddy, and there's me, and there's Mrs. Eleanor, and there's Mr. Rowan. She paused at the 5th figure, a young man with dark hair standing slightly apart from the others. And that's Matthew, because even though he's in heaven, he's still part of us. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She knelt down and pulled Lily into a fierce embrace, her body shaking with sobs that were somehow different from the ones Daniel had witnessed before. These weren't tears of grief. They were tears of release, of healing, of a heart finally learning to beat again. Thank you, Eleanor whispered. Thank you, sweet girl. They buried the drawing in the foundation together, sealing it beneath layers of concrete that would support the building for generations to come. And as Daniel watched Eleanor and Lily standing hand in hand at the edge of the construction site, he felt something shift inside his own chest, a loosening of the knot that had been there since Sarah died. He wasn't alone anymore. None of them were. The construction progressed faster than anyone expected. Eleanor's determination, combined with the resources of Hayes Industries and the enthusiasm of the community, created a momentum that seemed almost unstoppable. By spring, the skeleton of the building had risen from the ground, its steel beams reaching toward the sky like prayers made solid. But not everyone was ready to accept the changes. Harrison and his allies on the board continued to make trouble, filing lawsuits and challenging permits and leaking negative stories to the press. They painted Eleanor as an unstable widow who had lost touch with business reality, a woman driven by guilt rather than sound judgment. They're saying I've gone soft, Eleanor told Daniel one evening, after a particularly brutal day of media attacks. That I'm letting emotion override reason, that I'm going to destroy the company my husband built. Is that what you believe? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I believe that there's more to life than profit margins and shareholder returns. I believe that a company can do well by doing good. And I believe that my husband and my son would be proud of what we're building here. She paused. But sometimes, late at night, when the doubts creep in, I wonder if they're right. If I'm just an old woman trying to atone for sins that can never be forgiven. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. Do you remember what Lily said that day at the foundation? About Matthew being part of our family? Of course. She wasn't just being sweet, she meant it, and so do I. Daniel squeezed her hand. You're not alone in this, Eleanor. Whatever happens, whatever battles we have to fight, we fight them together, as a family. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes glistening. Then slowly, she smiled. A family, she repeated. I'd almost forgotten what that feels like. Then let me remind you. The final confrontation came on a Thursday in late April at an emergency shareholder meeting called by Harrison and his allies. They had gathered enough support to force a vote of no confidence in Eleanor's leadership, one last desperate attempt to wrest control of the company and return to their original plans for Riverside. Daniel drove Eleanor to the meeting, Lily in the back seat as always. The little girl was quiet during the drive, sensing the tension in the air. But when they pulled up to the headquarters, she reached forward and touched Eleanor's shoulder. You're going to win, she said simply. I know it. Eleanor turned to look at her, and Daniel saw something in her face that he'd never seen before. Not just determination, but peace. The peace of someone who had finally made peace with themselves. Thank you, sweetheart. I believe I am. She walked into the building with her head high and her shoulders back, Lily's drawing tucked into her pocket like a talisman. Daniel and Lily waited in the car, watching the sun set over the city, counting the minutes until they would know the outcome. 2 hours passed, then 3. The sky turned from orange to purple to black, and still there was no word. Finally, just as Daniel was beginning to fear the worst, his phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. It's over. We won. He showed the message to Lily, who cheered and bounced in her seat. Then his phone buzzed again. Come inside. There's someone I want you both to meet. Daniel and Lily made their way up to the boardroom where they found Eleanor surrounded by a crowd of supporters, shareholders, executives, community members who had come to witness the vote. Harrison was nowhere to be seen. Someone said he had stormed out after the final count, his face purple with rage. But it wasn't the victory that caught Daniel's attention. It was the man standing beside Eleanor, a young man in his 30s, with dark hair and kind eyes that seemed somehow familiar. Daniel, Lily, Eleanor said, her voice warm with emotion. I'd like you to meet someone. This is Thomas Reeves. He was Matthew's best friend in college. They dreamed of building the Hope House together. Thomas stepped forward and extended his hand. Mrs. Hayes has asked me to lead the architectural team for the new community center, to finish what Matthew started. His voice cracked slightly. It's the greatest honor of my life. Daniel shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. This wasn't just a victory in a boardroom battle. It was the closing of a circle, the completion of something that had been left unfinished for far too long. Eleanor knelt down to Lily's level and took both of her small hands in her own. We did it, she said softly. All of us, together. And it's because of you, Lily. Because you reminded me that families aren't just the people we're born to. They're the people we choose, the people who help us become who we're meant to be. Lily wrapped her arms around Eleanor's neck and hugged her tight. I love you, Mrs. Eleanor. Eleanor's eyes overflowed with tears. I love you too, sweet girl, more than you'll ever know. Daniel watched them embrace, his own eyes stinging. He thought about Sarah, about the life they had built together and the future they had dreamed of. He thought about the dark months after her death, the despair and the hopelessness, and the certainty that nothing would ever be good again. And he thought about how wrong he had been. The journey wasn't over. There was still work to be done, battles to be fought, wounds to be healed. But standing there in that boardroom, surrounded by the people who had become his family, Daniel knew one thing for certain. They were going to be okay, all of them. Together. The first snow of December fell softly on the day the Matthew Hayes Community Center opened its doors. Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, Lily perched on his shoulders so she could see over the hundreds of people who had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The building rose behind them, beautiful and solid, its glass walls catching the winter light and scattering it like diamonds across the fresh snow. It looked nothing like the cold, imposing structures that dominated the rest of the city's skyline. It looked warm, welcoming, alive. Daddy, I can see Mrs. Eleanor, Lily said, pointing toward the small stage that had been set up in front of the main entrance. She looks so pretty. Daniel followed his daughter's gaze and felt his breath catch in his throat. Eleanor stood at the podium, dressed not in her usual black but in a deep blue that brought out the silver in her hair. She was smiling, really smiling, not the careful, controlled expression she had worn for so long, but something genuine and radiant that transformed her entire face. Beside her stood Rowan, Marcus Washington, Thomas Reeves, and a dozen other people who had helped make this day possible. Behind them, a massive banner proclaimed the center's name in gold letters, with Matthew's photograph beneath it. The same photograph Eleanor had shown Lily all those months ago, the young man with the kind eyes and the stubborn chin who had dreamed of building something beautiful. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor began, her voice carrying clearly through the crisp winter air, "thank you for being here today. Thank you for believing in this project, for supporting this community, for refusing to give up even when the odds seemed impossible." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. Daniel knew she was looking for him, for Lily, and when her gaze found them, her smile deepened. "A little over a year ago, I was a woman who had lost everything. My son, my purpose, my will to live. I spent my days driving to places that reminded me of what I had lost, standing and staring and wondering why I was still here when he was gone." Eleanor's voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "And then something unexpected happened. A man took a job that no one else wanted. He brought his daughter into my life, and together they reminded me of something I had forgotten, that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story, that broken pieces can be put back together, that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Daniel recognized it immediately, Lily's drawing, the one they had buried in the foundation all those months ago. A copy, he realized, carefully preserved. "This drawing was made by a 7-year-old girl named Lily Brooks," Eleanor continued. "It shows a family, a father, a daughter, and 3 other people who have become part of their lives. One of those people is my son, Matthew. Even though he died before Lily was born, even though they never met, she included him in her family, because she understood something that took me 7 years to learn, that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form. It becomes the foundation on which we build something new." She held up the drawing for the crowd to see, and Daniel heard a collective murmur of emotion ripple through the audience. "This community center is built on that foundation," Eleanor said. "Not just the concrete and steel that holds it up, but the love and hope and determination of everyone who believed in Matthew's dream. The residents of Riverside who refused to give up their homes, the volunteers who gave their time and energy, the shareholders who chose compassion over profit, and most of all, a little girl who reminded an old woman how to feel again." Eleanor looked directly at Lily, her eyes shining with tears. "Lily, sweetheart, would you come up here and help me cut the ribbon?" Lily's eyes went wide. "Me?" "You," Daniel confirmed, lifting her off his shoulders. "Go on, baby. You earned this." He watched his daughter make her way through the crowd, her small form swallowed by the sea of adults until she emerged at the front and climbed the steps to the stage. Eleanor knelt down and handed her one handle of the giant scissors, and together, the silver-haired woman and the green-eyed child, they cut the red ribbon that stretched across the entrance. The crowd erupted in cheers. Balloons were released, floating up into the gray December sky. Music began to play, and people streamed toward the building's open doors, eager to explore the space that would serve their community for generations to come. Daniel hung back, watching from a distance as Lily gave Eleanor a fierce hug, as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions as the moment that had seemed impossible a year ago became gloriously, undeniably real. "Mr. Brooks?" He turned to find Rowan standing beside him, the older man's face creased with a rare smile. "Quite a day," Daniel said. "Indeed." Rowan was quiet for a moment, watching the celebration unfold. "I've been with the Hayes family for over 40 years. I've seen them at their best and their worst. I've watched them build empires and destroy themselves. But I've never seen anything like this." He turned to look at Daniel. "You did this. You and your daughter. You brought her back to life." Daniel shook his head. "We just reminded her of what she already knew. She did the rest herself." Perhaps, but the reminder was everything. Rowan reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Mrs. Hayes asked me to give you this. She wanted to wait until after the ceremony, but I think now is the right time. Daniel took the envelope, confused. What is it? Open it and see. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Eleanor's elegant handwriting. Daniel read it slowly, his eyes growing wider with each line. It was a deed, a property deed in his name for a 3-bedroom house in the Riverside development, one of the affordable housing units that had been built as part of the project. The address was listed at the bottom, along with a note in Eleanor's hand. Every family deserves a home. Now you have one. Daniel's hands trembled as he looked up at Rowan. I can't accept this. You can, and you will. Rowan's voice was firm but kind. Mrs. Hayes was very clear. She said it's not a gift, it's a thank you. For taking the job no one wanted, for bringing Lily into her life, for showing her that it's possible to start over even when everything seems lost. Daniel looked at the deed again, at the address that would become his home, at the future that had seemed so impossible a year ago when he stood at Sarah's grave with a foreclosure notice crumpled in his fist. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, just accept it, and be happy. Rowan smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. You've earned it, Mr. Brooks. Both of you. The celebration continued long into the evening. The community center was filled with laughter and music and the smell of food being prepared in the new kitchen. Children ran through the halls, exploring every corner of the building that would become their second home. Parents gathered in the common areas, sharing stories and dreams and hopes for the future. Daniel found Eleanor in the memorial garden, standing alone in front of the wall that had been dedicated to Matthew's memory. The wall was covered with photographs and drawings and letters from people whose lives he had touched, friends, teachers, fellow recovering addicts who had found hope in his story. He would have loved this, Eleanor said quietly, without turning around. All of it. The building, the community, the children running everywhere. He always said that the measure of a life wasn't what you accumulated, but what you gave away. He sounds like someone worth knowing. He was. Eleanor finally turned to face him, and Daniel saw that her eyes were wet, but her smile was peaceful. And in a strange way, I feel like you did know him. Through everything you've done this past year, through the way you've helped me become who I should have been all along. It's almost like he sent you to me. Daniel thought about the classified ad that had changed his life. $80,000 a year. Driver needed. No questions asked. He'd taken the job out of desperation, out of fear, out of a complete lack of other options. He'd had no idea what he was walking into, no clue that a simple driving job would transform him into part of a family he never knew he needed. Maybe he did, Daniel said, or maybe the universe just knew we all needed each other. Eleanor reached out and took his hand. I've been thinking about the future, about what comes next. What do you mean? The company is stable now. The Riverside project is complete. Harrison and his allies have resigned from the board, and the shareholders who believed in our vision are firmly in control. She paused. I don't need to fight anymore. I can finally rest. Are you retiring? In a way. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations, letting Thomas and the new leadership team take over. But I'm not disappearing. She squeezed his hand. I was hoping I could spend more time with you and Lily instead, if that's all right with you. Daniel felt his heart swell. More than all right. Good, Eleanor smiled. Because I have plans. Big plans. There are more communities like Riverside out there, more families who need help, more buildings waiting to be built. And I'd like you to be part of it, not as a driver, but as a partner, someone who can help me see what I've been missing for so long. Eleanor, I'm not qualified for... You're more qualified than anyone I know. You understand what it means to struggle. You know what families need because you've lived it. And most importantly, you have something that all the MBAs and executives in the world can't teach, a good heart. She looked at him with those dark, intense eyes. Say yes, Daniel. Say yes to being part of something bigger than yourself. Daniel thought about his life before all of this. The small apartment, the crushing debt, the despair that had seemed so absolute. He thought about Sarah, about the dreams they had shared, about the future they had planned together. She would have wanted this for him. She would have wanted him to find purpose, to find joy, to find a way to live fully, even in her absence. "Yes," he said, "I'll do it." Eleanor pulled him into a hug, and for a moment they stood there in the garden, surrounded by the memory of a son she had lost and the hope of a future they were building together. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. Thank you for taking a chance on me." They walked back into the community center together, where Lily was waiting for them with a plate of cookies and a smile that lit up her entire face. "Daddy, Mrs. Eleanor, come look. They have a whole room just for art. Mrs. Patterson said I can come here after school and make paintings whenever I want." Eleanor knelt down and brushed a strand of hair from Lily's face. "Would you like that? Coming here after school?" "Yes, and maybe you could come too sometimes. We could make paintings together." "I would love that." Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. "I would love that more than anything." The winter passed, and spring arrived with its promise of new beginnings. The community center flourished, becoming everything Matthew had dreamed of, and more. Daniel moved into the house Eleanor had given him, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Lily had a room of her own, decorated with paintings she had made in the art room and photographs of her mother that they could finally look at without crying. Eleanor became a constant presence in their lives. She had dinner with them twice a week, helped Lily with her homework, took them on trips to museums and parks and places that filled their lives with color and joy. She wasn't replacing Sarah, no one could ever do that, but she was becoming something else, something precious, something that felt like family. On a warm evening in late May, as the sun set over the city and the sky turned shades of pink and gold, Daniel found himself standing in the winter garden of the Hayes mansion. The space had been transformed since that first day he'd arrived for his interview. The overgrown hedges had been trimmed, the fountains repaired, the flowers blooming in riotous profusion. It was beautiful in a way it hadn't been for years, alive and vibrant and full of hope. Eleanor stood beside him, watching Lily chase fireflies across the lawn with the same concentrated joy she brought to everything she did. "Daniel," Eleanor said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He turned to look at her, noting the serious expression on her face. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about Matthew a lot lately, about what he would say if he could see all of this. The community center, the families we've helped, the life we've built." She paused. "I think he would be happy. I think he would finally be at peace." "I think so too. But there's something else." Eleanor reached up and unclasped the chain around her neck, the one that held the silver pendant she never took off. She held it out to Daniel. This was his, Matthew's. He wore it every day of his life, until the very end. It was found with him when he died, and I've been wearing it ever since, keeping him close to my heart. "Eleanor, I can't—" "Let me finish." She pressed the pendant into his hand. "I want Lily to have it, not to replace her mother, and not to forget Matthew, but to remember that she is part of something bigger now, a family that spans generations, that includes people who are gone but never forgotten, a family built not on blood, but on love." Daniel looked down at the pendant in his hand. It was warm from Eleanor's skin, worn smooth by years of being touched and held and treasured. He thought about Matthew, about the young man who had dreamed of building beautiful things, and he thought about Lily, about the little girl who had reminded an old woman how to feel again. "I'll give it to her," he said, "when she's ready to understand what it means." "Thank you." Eleanor smiled, and there were tears in her eyes, but they were tears of peace, not sorrow. "Thank you for everything, Daniel, for taking the job no one wanted, for bringing your daughter into my life, for showing me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be." "It turned out to be the best decision of my life," Daniel said. And as he watched Lily catch a firefly in her cupped hands, her laughter floating across the garden like music, he knew it was true. The job no one wanted had become the life he never knew he needed, a life filled with purpose and love and the strange, beautiful family they had built together from the ruins of their grief. Eleanor slipped her hand into his, and they stood together in the fading light, watching the child who had brought them back to life. Behind them, the mansion that had once felt like a tomb now glowed with warmth and welcome. Ahead of them, a future stretched out full of possibility. More buildings to construct, more families to help, more broken pieces to put back together. You know, Eleanor said softly, when I placed that advertisement, I never imagined this. I was looking for a driver, someone to take me to my stops and bring me home again. I wasn't looking for a family. Sometimes the things we're not looking for are exactly what we need. Yes, Eleanor squeezed his hand. Sometimes they are. Lily came running toward them, her hands cupped around a glowing firefly, her face illuminated by wonder. Look, Daddy. Look, Mrs. Eleanor. I caught one. It's like a tiny star. Daniel knelt down so he could see her treasure. The firefly pulsed with gentle light, alive and beautiful, and utterly miraculous in its simplicity. That's exactly what it is, sweetheart, he said. A tiny star, just for you. Can I keep it? Eleanor knelt beside them, her eyes reflecting the firefly's glow. You can hold it for a while, but then you have to let it go so it can find its family, so it can light the way for others. Lily thought about this for a moment. Then, carefully, she opened her hands and watched the firefly float away into the darkness, its light joining with dozens of others that had begun to emerge across the garden. It's going home, she said. Yes, baby, Daniel said, pulling her into a hug. It's going home. And so were they, all of them, together. The mansion that had once been a mausoleum was now a home. The woman who had been drowning in grief was now thriving. The man who had been desperate was now fulfilled. And the little girl who had been silent with sorrow was now laughing and playing and lighting up every room she entered. It wasn't the ending any of them had expected. It was something better, something real, something built not on what they had lost, but on what they had found in each other. A family, formed in the ruins, made whole by love. And on the wall of the community center, in a place of honor beside Matthew's photograph, hung a simple drawing of a house with a red door and 5 figures standing outside, a family that had found each other when they needed it most, holding hands against whatever darkness might come. Because that, in the end, was what mattered. Not the buildings or the money or the victories won in boardrooms, but the people, the connections, the love that could survive anything, even death, even grief, even the longest and coldest of winters. The end.